Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Scorpion podcast. So, for this one, we had a very special idea. I've been reflecting more and more on the implications that Neuralink, industrialization, mass production, the use of AI and VR has actually impacted our lives. And I wanted to discuss this one with the group. We haven't done one like this for a long time. We actually haven't spoken ever since the Whole Math podcast. So, for this one, we have Flying Kabbalah and Jordan back, so we are coming back as the main host, and we also have Killian here, who was a guest on this episode but has expressed interest in coming on for more episodes. So we're very excited to start working with him. I expect all of you to introduce yourself and your topics very briefly before we start talking. But the main focus on this podcast has been largely how do we handle the issue, or more or less the inevitable development, in my opinion, of these brain VR interfaces. What are our thoughts on them? And what are sort of the subjects in culture and politics and technology that are related to this? And how do we, as Zoomers, as Zoomer males, see this developing in the future? So I wanted to welcome everyone on very quickly. Flying Kabbalah, Jordan, and Killian. You may take the stage. Flying Kabbalah, I wanted to ask you first. What are your thoughts on this? Because I know we bump heads a lot more often now.
Right, so I'm Flying Kabbalah. I'm here to discuss the aforementioned topics that Jacob has already mentioned. Hopefully, we can definitely discuss the quote-unquote inevitability of the development of just AI slash VR, reality, Neuralink, etc., because I think there are some weak points that I could definitely discuss, and just the notion that it's going to inevitably spread across the globe and subsume all of humanity. So we can definitely analyze that, and our discussion definitely can reach into other areas that are related to this, like what certain social or geopolitical movements or just certain geopolitical entities regard AI or just VR, Neuralink reality, however you want to put it. And we could definitely discuss, the quote-unquote cons of all of that, and why I think it's bad from Heideggerian point of view, so to speak.
You're really into Heidegger. You're like super into Heidegger recently.
Yeah, I actually almost put him on to Heidegger in a sense, introduced him to him a couple months ago. Yeah, I'm Jordan. I'm one of the founding members of Scorpion Movement. I'm just a thinker, aspiring writer. I have a book coming out soon that I've just hit the 400-page countdown, actually, so I'm excited about that. And I'd say my intellectual project is dedicated primarily to philosophizing about topics and themes such as capitalism, modernity, globalization, technology, everything that's related to the direction that it seems as if humanity is going in. And I want to approach these topics that Jacob mentioned, such as artificial intelligence, virtual reality, if not the virtualization of reality itself that the West is largely headed towards, from a more, not just a philosophical perspective, but more specifically a genealogical perspective, to paraphrase Nietzsche, for example. And what I mean by genealogical perspective is tracing the roots of these processes throughout history to see how they arose, the logic, both the theoretical and the practical manifestations along the way, how we got here, and that can be achieved, for example, through analyzing the history of the internet, its origins in the military-industrial complex, and in the projects of DARPA, for instance, which essentially operates as an arm of the U.S. deep state, and which I know is a very sort of overused term, but I do think that it communicates effectively what's at play here. And in addition to the more practical and material side of things, how these processes materially arose, I dive into the philosophical and theoretical implications of them, and also their philosophical and theoretical roots. So how did the advent of modernity and everything that we associate with it, industrialization, mass society, technology, right, the globalization and this increasing interconnectedness of the world that we see today, how did all of these factors arise, and how are they culminating towards this end state that Jacob talks about, of the virtualization of reality? That is a key part of my intellectual project. And furthermore, I actually integrate that in a similar manner as Flying Kabbalah. I integrate that with analysis of global politics. So how all of those processes fundamentally trace from, in a sense, we could say this geographic but also cultural and political body of the West, which is now extended to cover a very broad part of the world. How that's manifested in this political bloc of interstate relations, of intercorporation relations, and how that bloc is actually now combating this sort of rising Eurasianist bloc, to use the Duginist terminology, and how that's related to the struggles they aforementioned of technology, capitalism, globalization, etc., etc. So it's a pretty complex intellectual project, very multifaceted, but I mean, that complex nature is necessary to deal with the types of issues that we're talking about today. So, I mean, I'll pass it to Dylan here if he wants to give an introduction of what he's about. So, thank you.
Okay, shit. Put me on the spot there.
Go on.
I'm not really good at introductions, but yo, it's Killing here, and I'm new to the podcast. Jacob approached me a couple of weeks ago. Felt kind of a connection to me, and I've only been relatively nuanced in this subject of like kind of a technological singularity and the kind of a kind of like techno capitalist hegemony in the West for only about a year or two now, and I haven't made any completely strong interpretations on it because I'm still trying to find a stable, ideological leaning. And I've explored a lot of these groups just to hear different concepts and philosophies on this. I'm more of a I don't know, man.
No, that was a pretty good introduction, and you did expand that you were into this sort of stuff, and we are glad to have you primarily because you're from Canada and because you make all of this stuff on TikTok. So we're here to have you speaking on these different perspectives. I think I cut you off a little bit. Is there anything more you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I actually kind of needed to be cut off. I don't know where to necessarily start off on.
Okay, so one of the reasons why I think you're a good fit for this podcast is that you comment on this sort of stuff and you add your own thoughts that can branch out into other directions. I think that's an excellent thing that we need right here. And as soon as we start like discussing these things, I find that Jordan often comes with the Heideggerian perspective, and then no, not Jordan. Flying Kabbalah comes with the Heideggerian perspective. Jordan sometimes too. Then he goes into Dugin and all of that. And then we need someone to keep us down to earth. And I've been doing that for a long time, and it has been excruciating. Okay, so we are glad to have you. I wanted to know like what kind of thoughts that you had on what Flying Kabbalah was saying, though.
Sorry, I had technological difficulties, but on the topics of like Eurasianism versus of like kind of a Eurasianist bloc, as Dugin would say. I used to be a very, very radical fourth theory practitioner. I used to believe in Dugin a lot, but I've kind of fourth theory. I've become kind of disillusioned with the Eurasianist bloc, as I do think Eurasianism is the biggest supporter of like dissidents in the West, but I don't think Western dissidents would have a place within like a Eurasianist hegemony of the world. I believe these two forces to be somewhat comparable in their not their motives, but it's control. Both just want control and kind of a commodification of their ideology in society, and most things that the Eurasianist bloc currently is promoting would be swept under the rug in a Eurasianist victory scenario, I believe. So I think Eurasianists are a good counterbalance to kind of the West, but I wouldn't say they're the necessarily the cure per se.
Right.
They're more of a
Just opposition, but not necessarily the idealistic. Here, as you say.
Yeah.
Well,
for
if that's
sure.
the case, then what do you foresee occurring in the event of a Eurasianist victory then? Because you have described it more opportunistic. You don't really think that they're going to be committed to carrying out this ideological program fully. So what do you think?
Very much, I'd say very much a kind of a socially centrist, not authoritarian capitalist system, a Singaporean system. I believe the Eurasianist bloc would implement a very authoritative state capitalist system within many of these countries that has already been implemented in places like Vietnam and China and Singapore, of course, where this originated. And personally, I don't believe that's the best alternative to the West. I guess what I believe would happen is it'd be somewhat comparable to a Western victory scenario, just a much huger, a much less insistence on kind of this like multiculturalist kind of liberal social ideology. But for sure, I believe that the West and the Eurasianists are very comparable when it comes to kind of views on economics and technology.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to comment on that, and I certainly agree with that point of view to some extent, because we do. I guess there do exist a certain amount of quote unquote Marxist-Leninists on the internet. I think Haas really comes to mind that basically try to defend the Eurasianist bloc as if it truly fits within their values. Meanwhile, I mean, it's obviously not a complete. China, for instance, not a complete Marxist socialist state. Probably the closest to that is North Korea. That still exists because China and Vietnam, as you say, even though they're nominally communist, they have introduced state capitalist economies to at least to a certain extent, less to an extent that is less than it is in the West, but it still exists. But at the same time, we ought to be considering the fact that they're the forces that can at least be more molded to fit.
For sure.
I guess our idealistic thinking, if that makes sense, because
they're definitely they're definitely more of a I'd say they're good. Yeah, they're closer. They're a lot closer to us than the West. I feel like they're kind of good. They're good bedmates. I wouldn't necessarily say they're the best. They're the best predominant ideology, but to have these people on our side at least would be a gigantic beneficiary influence. You know what I mean? It'd be I don't really know what to compare it to like historically, but like
I guess they kind of bankroll.
I think Jacob earlier brought up the case of Ezra Pound.
Yep.
Yeah, it's sort of a one struggle scenario.
Yeah.
It's definitely we share a vehement like ideological enemy that if we were to unite against would prove beneficial to our ideology, but within like the idealized world, their ideology is definitely not comparable to it. You know what I mean?
Killian is spitting facts, and we put him on the spot so much that he's nervous, but he's literally saying like, no. That I agree with that completely, Jordan.
Yeah, I think what he said earlier actually falls well within this. Actually, some of the academic political science literature on this, because if you study international relations theory, well, you learn about this school of thought that's quite influential called realism, and they actually posit that there's this anarchic world system, an Indian anarchic world system. Political actors fundamentally act in their own self-interests above all else, and they'll seek to secure power and domination over the world system at all costs. And so the realists, and they're represented by some intellectuals like John Mearsheimer, currently, who also wrote that very influential book, The Israel Lobby in U.S. Foreign Policy. People like John Mearsheimer, Stephen Walt, Robert Pape, he's another professor at the University of Chicago. They have this realist paradigm, and they actually think from a perspective that's somewhat at odds with the, say, the Duginist perspective, which is a bit more ideological. They think that because of this, of the fact that liberal hegemony is so entrenched, and that this bloc that's led by the United States occupies such a significant percentage of power, of global power, it's inevitably going to lead to a counter reaction from countries that conceive of themselves as falling outside of that bloc, that don't think that they're sharing that power, and that's through the realist paradigm. It's a very Machiavellian way of viewing global politics. So there is actually a lot of convergence between some of the academic literature on this matter and what Killinger brought up. So I do think that is a good point. And yes, what I'll say is there's a key difference though between these two blocks and just the intellectual bedrock of their respective foreign policies, right? Because I don't think, though, however, with that being said, with the realist view being acknowledged, and I admire the realists a lot, and I do think there's a lot of interesting material in there. I don't completely agree with them in the respect that I do think that the United States, for instance, actually does act in such a way as to propagate and perpetuate a very specific ideology. I don't think that they purely act in order to secure their material interests. That is, for example, to acquire natural resources from other territories and maximize their wealth. I do think there's a very, very ideological, liberal crusader mentality that's sort of hardwired out the American system. But the thing is, that's being propagated by elites that are high up in the administrations and in the bureaucratic class that inform the people who actually make the foreign policy decisions and persuade them to go in a certain way. Right, that's always been the case. For example, if you go back to the War on Terror, when we saw neoconservatism was the dominant ideology in the government at the time, the Bush administration, that was being perpetuated by certain intellectuals, and in that case, borrowed from the ideas of this thinker named Leo Strauss that had this very bizarre. It wasn't even really a liberal ideology. That was how they disguised it. That which was this bizarrely sort of militaristic worldview that viewed war as something that's positive, that needs to be brought to other countries. That was the philosophical underpinning of the Iraq wars. Very bizarre. Not many people are actually aware of this. But the point is, though, that now that neoconservative viewpoint has sublated itself somewhat, to use the term Hegelian terminology, into this new liberal crusader form, which is just about essentially spreading the ideals of a liberal democracy. I don't really regard it as that democratic, but nominally liberal democracy to the rest of the world. That's because the intellectuals within the U.S. administration that hold those views, that influence them to go in a certain way. And that holds true for Europe as well. That holds true for Canada, and pretty much every country that's in this Western bloc. But if you look at the intellectuals that are really prominent in, for example, countries like China, Russia, Iran, they hold almost the exact diametrically opposed philosophical positions, and they're pretty much all aware of the types of thinkers that we talk about regularly on this podcast. They're aware of people like Heidegger, right? In China, you see, he's a thinker of the German conservative revolution. He's had a really huge influence on their legal system. They've directly applied his principles actually to their legal system. All of these interesting thinkers that we talked about that were very critical of technology, of modernity, of globalization, of capitalism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything that the West is sort of concentrated around. Those ideas are actually being reproduced, and they're being passed along to the literal foreign policy elites and key decision makers of these countries in Russia, Iran, China. Like, Dugin is not just, for example, because he's really important in this. Dugin is not just some former academic or a philosopher who just writes a lot from the comfort of his desk. I mean, he's someone who's actually been very close to even Putin himself, who is the single most powerful man in Russia and probably one of the most powerful men in the world. So I do think that that's something to consider as well. The role of elites in this whole system. Like, if you compare the elites and the intellectuals in these respective blocks, they hold diametrically opposed worldviews, and that's influencing their foreign policy right now. Like, a really, really clear example of this is the Russia-Ukraine war, and I think it was so clear, because, for example, the reception of Dugin in the West is mostly not just negative and derisive, but almost comical in a sense. They've always laughed them off for a long time. Thought, oh, this guy's just crazy, sort of a clown. Yeah, I mean, he does have some eccentric mannerisms, of course, but they couldn't even do that anymore at this point because it became so obvious that Eurasianism, the specific ideology of Eurasianism, was a driving factor behind Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is one of the single most important global conflicts right now. So that's what I'd say in regards to the clash between the two blocks. And to what extent would the world that a Eurasianist victory would usher in differ from the world that we have today? I mean, it's a tough question.
Yeah.
What do Jacob? What do you think about that?
I wanted to relate it more to the topic of technology and how it would influence it, because I believe there are these two contrasting powers, as Dugin outlines, the Atlanticists and the Eurasianists. And while we can speculate what a Eurasianist cultural victory would look like, we're inevitably heading in a direction that's expressly Western. A lot of these Western forces, the American government and American cultural influence, like media in particular, have been steering us in a particular direction. And I think the thing that I wrote a paper on a couple of days ago, and this revelation that I've had, is that unilaterally we are heading towards a future where our reality will be simulated. There will be this other dimension that is virtual, and people made fun. A lot of people made fun out of this concept that is expressly, Westernist and Atlanticist, of this metaverse. When Mark Zuckerberg was proposing it, that everybody's going to wear VR headsets and exist in the metaverse, it didn't seem to make much sense. But now, as we get further into it, as phones have become an extension of us and how we live in the world, right? Phones are soon not going to be a physical. Oh, technical issue. bro, I don't want to start quacking in the middle of the podcast. What I was saying. Fix that issue, by the way, Jordan. Phones are no longer going to be an extension of us in the physical world. They're no longer going to be like a little thing that we check our notifications on. Ultimately, we're going to be in a future where with Neuralink and what Elon Musk is doing, we're going to basically have that shit implanted in our heads. That's what I believe is going to inevitably happen. And Flying Kabbalah, before we started the podcast, we were having a little bit of a side discussion on this. I think that future is inevitable. And I think as traditionalists, they try to combat this, saying, oh, well, we're going to move to a farm and study our Bible, and me and my wife, and my trad GF wife, are going to have 8 kids. Well, right, if the rest of society adapts to this new technological singularity, then you're going to be left the last one standing. Killionaire, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, on that topic, on the kind of the live on a farm with your wife, I kind of believe that's kind of an Atlanticist psyop, as I feel like it's artificially promoted in many right wing circles to kind of keep the right out of the political
politics.
Yeah, sending us into exile.
Out of politics.
Yeah. Not only the right, just everyone. Everyone who wants to live a more traditional life.
Isolating us from seizing political power to achieve a better world. Because when it's only these like Atlanticist ideologues in positions of power and like technology within like very urban centers, they could just easily, not that they'd even do that because they have no need to, but they just steamroll all traditionalist opposition, and without a kind of without kind of like cohesion within these circles in urban centers, then there would be there's no chance of victory for anyone who goes against the grain, because when there's no opposition, there's no opposition. It's really not that hard of a concept to grasp.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Practicality of it is something to consider as well.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you can't just live in this ideological sort of abstract realm. You have to situate yourself in reality and sustain lifestyle. And I don't think when you think about it, it's quite ironic that many of the people that go on and on the most about returning to tradition and embracing these anarcho-primitivist kind of ideals, they're also the ones who are most attached to these devices. I know
for sure.
It's a bit of a truism to point that out at this point, but it should be stated nonetheless. So I don't even think that those people would necessarily be able to adapt in the first place to a dramatic shift in lifestyle like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, I think despite the impracticality, which I will admit is the case, the impracticality of just abandoning all these modern comforts that most of us are so attached to and relying on, and embracing this more sustainable, just natural lifestyle, more in tune with, for example, ideas like deep ecology, we can still, despite the practicality of a full shift, we can still try and incorporate some of those principles into our daily life. I know it sounds a bit wishy-washy, a bit woo-woo, but I really believe that if you can't pinpoint an exact struggle, or if you can't find a specific way to contribute to, for example, this large-scale political or societal struggle, you should at least be waging a struggle against yourself, in a sense. Mm-hmm. Against your own internal weakness, right? Against everything within you that's just emblematic of this late capitalist paradigm that we live in. So in that sense, you absolutely should incorporate some of those principles into your daily life. Try and slowly wean off of these technological addictions and all these problems. That's why I've actually talked about this with Flying Kabbalah before, but it's quite fascinating how, self-improvement content has really blown up on YouTube and on social media in general in the past couple of years. And there's a very fascinating intersection that I think most people just don't talk about, and I think many people aren't even aware that it exists. But there's a fascinating intersection of self-improvement communities, specifically diving really deep into the self-improvement communities, and then emerging at the other end, at the end of the rabbit hole, in a sense, as someone who's actually very interested in these types of topics: philosophy, deep ecology, thinking about modernity and globalization. Because you realize that, even with what I said being kept in mind, you can self-improve all you want, but at the end of the day, you are situated, however, in the world and in a society. Which I know that's obviously somewhat of a meme, but you can't just completely detach yourself from that unless you literally embrace the lifestyle of a full hermit, which, like I said, is quite impractical. And then once you realize that there are certain factors that actually, for example, that not only prevent you or that hinder in the pursuit of your self-improvement goals, but that are actually designed that way intentionally by certain, for example, corporate entities, right? The fact that there are advertisements everywhere, that you can't go into any public space without being bombarded with noise, right? There's always just, very commercial, repetitive music playing at every single supermarket. Now, I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but that's not just by accident. That's not by chance. No. It's actually that's specifically intentional to essentially wage a war in your mind to make you much more distracted. There are people that I've noticed it a lot, but there are many people that they almost seem like AFK when you speak to them. They're very sort of out of it. They're very detached, and they have almost these blank stares on their faces. And a lot of that is just because they're distracted, in a sense. Most people are actually constantly distracted, especially if you think about Zoomers today. And this ties into what we're talking about with Neuralink and the brain-computer interface. I've talked to so many people that are around our age, because we're all Zoomer guys, right?
Yeah.
They just can't fucking focus on anything.
No.
Their mind wanders, very distracted. They have no like virile kind of focus or drive in life, and they're always very, very distracted. That's not just by chance. And that's the most sinister aspect of this. That is specifically designed and perpetuated by actually powerful corporations, with the processes that I mentioned that seep into our daily lives and that are so pervasive that we don't even realize that they exist, in a sense.
Well, yeah, no,
People, imagine how. What do you guys think? Do you guys agree with me that their society in general, and I think this is important, is becoming less quiet?
Yep.
And I know that sounds,
for sure.
I know that sounds vague, and maybe not society, but the urban and residential spaces that we live in the societal communal spaces, the supermarkets, gyms, anywhere that you go to interact with other people or to just do anything that you literally need to do in order to live, are becoming less quiet, literally.
Yeah, no, for sure.
What do you guys think of that? Because that definitely ties into everything else that's happening here when it comes to creation.
I think that's certainly real. I mean, like, even what you were talking about with like how people are much more distracted and kind of overstimulated. It's happening to me like right fucking now. I'm playing Skyrim as we speak. Like,
I noticed.
It's like we've reached, like, at least as like a generation, we've become so not multifaceted, but like we have so much going on at once. It's like it's hard to like specifically fixate on one thing. Like, exactly. I saw this thing earlier today that we have I don't know if it was real or not. It could have been just like a boomer iPhone bad thing, but it said that we have as a generation we have less of a attention span than a goldfish.
No, I believe that.
Like, yeah, we have an 8-second attention span, and goldfishes have a 9. It's like I just found that like to be insane.
Right. I mean, I definitely think there's a normalization of multitasking, just to put all of that phenomena under one term. Yeah, because I mean, I think there's really been a development of. I mean, I think it's called lo-fi music, right?
Yeah,
lo-fi hip-hops, right? I mean, just the normalization of that phenomenon of I don't know, doing your homework while listening to something like that, or listening to a podcast.
Oh,
as you're writing an essay. I mean, it's I'm not particularly of the view that the human brain has advanced to such an extent that we can effectively engage intellectually with two pieces of information. I mean, I think on the other hand, it's just a development of being distracted or more commotion happening in your brain, and thus your inability of really being able to perform effectively in both tasks that you're doing, or all the tasks that you're doing in case if you're doing more than two.
Yeah.
But then
go ahead.
So in the beginning of the podcast, we did say that we are going to be talking about Neuralink. And stuff like that, just the AI virtual reality. I think I'd be interested in going to that topic more directly. I did also mention that I'd be going at that topic from a more of a Heideggerian point of view.
I'd love
just more by what I meant by that, more broadly or generally speaking, is that I mean, I consider myself a humanist when it comes to technology. Because I do think that the point of technology ultimately is to advance healthy human ends.
That should be the ends of technology.
The goal,
but it's not.
Yeah, or the end. In other words,
it doesn't appear to me to be the direction that it actually achieves. However,
no, absolutely not. I mean, because I'm not a Marxist-Leninist, but I think Marxists or just communists in general do a good job of critiquing the corporate influence on society in general, because I think a while ago I saw how it was something about a Marxist writing about how negative or how technology negatively affects life, and particularly technology that affects human life in a negative way that just leads to more cultural degradation, which is kind of interesting. I mean, you don't, from kind of a boomer point of view, where just an anti-commie point of view, you don't really think that a communist would be writing something like that. But
for sure, yeah.
But on a previous podcast, Jordan, you pointed out that Marx, I mean, he wasn't an idealist, more of just a what's the word I'm looking for? Just an
historical materialist, maybe.
Yeah, but exactly. And he was a humanist at the same time. So he wasn't, for him, the value or the essence of being human trumped material profit. And I mean, geopolitically, if you consider the corporate influence in the West, you definitely see material profits trumping over human interests, and particularly over the interests of the native populations of the West. So, I mean, in Europe, earlier you have mentioned that in the European Union, the elite basically believes that anyone in the world can be European. I mean, that's not in the interests of the native European population, or at least those that are ethnic nationalists, so to speak. I mean, it's really just a lot of what their policy, pretty much all of it, is to advance their, material interests.
That's true, because the completely unmitigated movement of labor and capital across the world, that ultimately does benefit the major capitalist classes above all else. I mean, I've actually argued with economists in the past about this, because if you look at the economic research, for example, many economists, this is sort of mindset that they have. They view a policy, even a quite an extreme policy like open borders, as something that would be highly beneficial, just because it would explode and dramatically increase global GDP. Which makes sense from an intuitive perspective. We're getting rid of barriers to trade and capital. Of course, that's going to increase production and consumption. That all factors into the GDP equation. Of course, that's going to increase world GDP and wealth. But and then from there they say that's going to contribute to a higher and a more prosperous quality of life for not just the capitalist classes, but for the common classes as well. And then you ask them, well, why is that the case? And they'll say because it's going to reduce the price of goods. Which goods? It's generally these cheap consumer trinkets, in a sense, that don't actually add like a very sort of deeper, profound value or meaning to our lives, right?
Shit we don't need, like from Fight Club.
Yes, that just perpetuates just consumerist process. And I don't really think that just slight reductions in the cost of consumer goods, are worth the complete desacralization of life that this results in. And I also don't think that they actually outweigh the gains that are made by corporate classes, right? From a policy like open borders, because ultimately they would benefit first and foremost from this policy. I mean, they have unmitigated access to labor sources, not just from, say, the country that they're based in, even though we're seeing that even now that's increasingly obsolete as corporations are rootless, they're global, right? They can operate anywhere, anywhere, at any time, any place. They're virtual in a sense, which is actually just like provides the perfect transition to the topic of the virtualization of reality that I know, Jacob, you wanted to talk about. And because of that, they can extract labor and resources from essentially any location on the planet. And that would be highly facilitated by policy like open borders. So that's how they would benefit first and foremost. And you said, when talking about the redefinition of Europe, and not just Europe, but probably other continents and countries as well, and this entirely civic definition where anyone can be European. Well, we did mention this briefly right before the podcast, and right after I mentioned this, right after I detailed this, these definitional distinctions, I want to get into to talk about things like the brain-computer interface. But if you study nationalism, like I have at the academic level, you'll know that we tend to discuss two different types, right? These aren't the only types, but in the contemporary world, we have civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. And civic nationalism unites the nation to legal and administrative procedures, right? So anyone can be part of the nation, of the people group, so long as they submit and adhere to, for example, the constitution of the country, legal and juridical processes. And we see that, the United States and France are the exemplary models of that. And then ethnic nationalism is regarded by most of us moderns as a lot more primitive. It's more autochthonous in nature. It says no, you have, in order to be a member of the nation, you have to have some sort of blood or communal ties, right? Ancestral ties. But what we're actually seeing is, for one, what's happening is not only throughout the progress of modernity and globalization have many ethnic identities actually been subsumed and essentially erased. Right, specifically the cultural practices of those varying peoples, we see them not only subsumed into this modern homogenous system, but at the same time we see, I think what the goal of these institutions like the EU and United Nations is to actually expand and extrapolate the civic nation, which before was limited just to the state form, right? To countries like the United States and France, to actually expand that to the level of humanity. To smooth over ethnic differences, because when you have ethnic differences, you inherently have heterogeneity, you have difference, right? And there, in psychology, there's this concept of in-group heterogeneity and out-group homogeneity, right? And that inherently comes with conflict, because the in-group perceives the out-group as this, out-group homogeneity. The in-group perceives the out-group as this uniformly sort of different, strange, alien, bizarre, and likely malicious force, and they'll inevitably come to conflict with each other, right? Killing, or you mentioned this, you can't just take people from two completely different ethnic and cultural backgrounds, put them in the same system, expect everything to unfold in an entirely smooth manner, right? I mean, and history is borne that out time and time again. We saw that in Yugoslavia, the dissolution of Yugoslavia in the 90s. So many examples, right? So the people that run these giant administrations and bureaucratic entities, they're very, very aware of that. They're aware of this basic history. And so they do realize that ethnic distinctions are going to be a major impediment to the process of globalization. And that's why I think that they're slowly being smoothed over and subsumed into this civic nation. But it's not just a particular civic nation, like linked to the state forms of, for example, the U.S. or France. They want to make all of mankind a civic nation. We're the only thing that
citizen of the world.
Yes, citizen of the world. That's exactly what they want to promote. We're actually no longer have any rootedness and any sort of particularity, but we're abstracted from our history in a sense. We're completely historicized, and the only thing that bounds us is our adherence to these legal codes, essentially, because that's what the EU is. You mentioned the EU. Well, the EU hasn't always been around, right? I mean, there have been theorists that have come up with ideas that would seem to foreshadow it, like Immanuel Kant, who's really significant in that regard, because he wrote up in the 18th century about how he thought Europe would progress in such a way as to reach this end state of a supernatural confederation of cosmopolitanism, and that is essentially what the EU is. But the EU is really, what's so haunting about this is that if you look at for example, and I want to hear what you guys think about this. If you look at the codes and principles that underlie the EU, the legal documents, they're completely universalist. They could be applied to any country or not just any people group, they could even be applied to a business or a corporation. There's nothing that's actually distinctly European about it, in a sense. And that's the sort of a microcosm of the global model that they envision for humanity and that we are progressing towards. You're going to be completely, like, for anyone watching this, you're going to be completely uprooted from your past. These people don't want you to have any sort of traditional ethnic ties. I mean, I'm actually I know that sounds sort of strange or maybe a bit over the top, but I'm quite convinced of that at this point. They want us to submit to the civic nation, and they want all of humanity to become the civic nation. That's the direction that they're going in. And it started first in the West, in these Western European countries, because they were the first countries to develop this model of civic nationalism. And then from there, we got the EU and these major global institutions like the UN. And now all of humanity is headed toward the same fate. And what that really does is, I mean, you guys realize, I'm sure you guys are well aware of this, but legal and bureaucratic codes cannot actually produce any deep feelings or sentiments in people. They just can't. I mean, no one gives a fuck about it at the end of the day. No one is going to die for, a series of laws that some EU bureaucrat wrote. But people actually are willing to die for a deeper identity. for their ethnic identity, right? I mean, you guys are well aware of that. If you just look at history, there's an abundance of evidence to prove that. And what that also contributes to, in a sense, is the atomization of society, because we're uprooted from any sort of meaningful collectives, and the city is a microcosm of this. And so you tell anyone that you have to be the reason that they outline for liberating people, quote unquote, liberating people from these collectives, is so that you're free to pursue any sort of path that you want, which sounds great on paper, but the problem is everyone else is doing the same thing. And so that just creates this state of discordance. You can't really, you never feel existentially fulfilled because you just don't really have a mission in life that actually bounds you to other people, right? It's the atomization of society. That's what the city is, Like if you look at modern cities, it's just all of these people that have nothing bounding them, nothing in common, no deep or ancestral ties, and they're all packed together like throngs, like animals in cages, and they go to their 9-to-5 jobs in return. I mean, I know it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but it's the atomization of society. That's what this contributes to, and that is what I think is at the essence of the virtualization of reality, Jacob, and Flying Kabbalah, that you guys talked about that. Because when you think about it, it's part of the same process, isn't it? VR headsets, simulated reality.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that because
same process. It uproots us from reality itself. That's literally what VR is.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's also what the brain-computer interface is going to result in. Some people think, this is just going to be kept to the military, because it is true that the military played a key role in the development of the brain-computer interface. I mean, it goes back to DARPA, it goes back to the U.S. Deep State and the Pentagon. They did want to use this, for example, to make more powerful and cold-blooded soldiers, right? That was obviously a part of this, and that ties into projects like MK Ultra, for example, which is its own rabbit hole that we could go down on if you want, as an example of how social engineering works in the modern age. But it's not just going to be limited to the military, and I think it's quite obvious that it isn't going to be limited. Many people are predisposed to think of it in that type of way because of pop culture and movies. They might have seen movies where you have super soldiers that take these serums or link themselves to this advanced technology so that they can dominate other soldiers in battle. That's not the exclusive application of this that we're going to see in reality. It's going to be extended to the social realm of everyday human life. And so that from there, I wanted to ask you guys, Jacob, Flying Kabbalah, Killian, how do you foresee this occurring? And what forms do you think it's going to take? And just in general, I mean, if you have anything that you want to add to my analysis, just go ahead, because I've been talking for a while. So,
yeah, I definitely agree with what you said regarding the cities. I mean, I definitely have personal experience from cities because I do happen to be an urbanite.
I mean, I think we all live in cities. I don't
yeah, we basically all are.
I don't live in
urbanites.
Well, most of us. So 3 out of 4 in a sense.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So, which is still
so yeah, I mean, if you live in a big city in the West, particularly if you live in a more Western, or if you live in a more liberal / leftist region of your state, you really see the effects of multiculturalism and just corporate control that really plays on the city. People, I mean, it's obviously a huge disconnect, especially if you have a multicultural population that's literally all across the world. I mean, in West Coast cities, San Diego, Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle, the drug problem and the homeless problem subsequently is extremely, I mean, it's really abysmal, really, because, I mean, you literally see feces on the streets, and public transportation literally smells like human urine or feces. Mm-hmm. And just, I mean, some people report seeing heroin needles, just lots of, literal lunatics walking around. Just that can literally stab you. I think
that's an everyday experience now.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. And I mean, in a city like Seattle, for instance, that's the headquarters, by the way, of Amazon. That's the biggest corporation in the world. And I mean, it really shows you how much corporations care about reality, if you really think about it.
They don't, yes.
Yeah. So Neuralink, right? We were also discussing it. I think just all of that stuff is really a kind of a continuation of what you were talking about, just the advancement of civic, well, just the advancement of multiculturalism and globalism really onto everyone. But so Neuralink, as of right now, is owned by Elon Musk.
Yep.
I believe it is a company, and I believe that the first time that they implanted a chip into someone's brain was in January of 2024.
Yep.
So of this year,
Very topical, very on the nose.
right? And I believe, if I'm not wrong, that it was very a pretty expensive project at that. If I'm not wrong, it was about
Several billion dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So I remember actually read a short article about this, but I haven't retained just everything that I was talking about. But I'm in particular wondering about what you think in terms of how much this phenomenon of just literally implanting chips into someone's brain is going to expand industrially. Or, I mean, you have talked about the inevitability of an AI or slash VR reality taking over the real world. So could you talk about how you particularly see this all playing out? So, I mean, would you expect that it's going to develop as a normal concept in 20 years, for instance?
Who is this question directed to? I assume me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely start with
I
that.
guess anyone can jump in.
Because I was confused whether you were addressing Jordan or me.
I think he was addressing me.
Well, yeah, I guess just anyone that I was just talking about anyone that harbors the notion that it's inevitable.
I want to hear Jacob's take on it first. So go ahead.
I wanted to hear Jordan's take, but I'd be happy to elaborate. Flying Kabbalah, you didn't finish your question.
Right. So my question is, it did take a lot of resources and time for Neuralink to plant chips in someone's brain this year. But I mean, this would subsequently mean that it'll probably take a while for it to develop into an everyday commodity like a car or an iPhone. So how do you practically see it playing out?
Okay, so in the 1950s, I remember reading somewhere in an article that the average cost to buy a computer was, I believe, somewhere around $5 million, and we're talking in 1950s dollars. So the immense price that it cost to buy technology of that size was primarily what discouraged a lot of corporations from utilizing it. But soon after IBM and then later its successors adapted the technology after it became used in a military context, it slowly rolled out to the public. Similarly, chatbots and artificial intelligence technologies such as ChatGPT were formerly limited to these in-groups, these people using intranet in various companies or even the military-industrial complex, because utilizing artificial intelligence technology was extremely expensive. In order to have a neural network that acts much in the same way as a person's brain does, a lot of these companies needed to utilize various, computing techniques that were not necessarily open to the public. But as time went on, really, this technology became much cheaper. We were able to utilize the same computing power that was used to get astronauts to the moon and costed billions of dollars in our phones. And if this trend continues, which it will, the power of computing will accelerate while the prices drop. And because we have this steady import of chips from Taiwan, and as such, thank you, John David, for joining, we eventually we join this singularity where all of this technology is getting cheaper and cheaper while its computing power increases. Eventually, within the next 10 to 20 years, we will have a point at which the brain power that a human uses in a much different way, but in a similar context, will be commercially produced. This will be something that will be sold. So when I talk about creating computer interfaces, I don't mean plugging something in or turning on a VR headset and then, whoa, you turn to the left and you turn to the right. human reality, what we construe as reality, something that may not necessarily be real in the same way that we interpret it as being real, or the conviction that it is real, is only limited to 5 senses: sight, smell, touch, hearing, and taste.
Yeah.
If
And they can be replicated through this type of technology. Right?
Exactly. If Neuralink enables people to have this mapping of their brains, if we are able to, through neurology and through psychology, which is my major and my term of academic focus, if we are able to fully replicate a map of how our brains work, we can slowly, and by we I mean humanity, we can slowly transfer to a singularity where these sort of technologies like Neuralink can manufacture those senses. Those senses can be replicated in a virtual setting. And what happens when everything you touch, everything you smell, everything you taste is a subject of a virtual simulation? That virtual simulation becomes reality. You morph into this alternate dimension. And as schizo as it sounds, that is the singularity that we are approaching. And these elites, formerly Jacob Rothschild, then George Soros, then Carl Schwab, these people know that this is the direction that things are heading. Therefore, they're trying to centralize everything so that the food industry, the electronics industry, everything is in this sort of linear way, so that once this technology is invented, they can use that those industries to crack down on how it is being implemented and utilize it to, by their consent, by their knowledge, to their advantage. Now, the elites know this, but the one... Sorry, I don't want to be interrupted. One major thing that I think is going to take precedence in this case as this technology becomes cheaper, the most important sense that we have, I believe, in our brains is touch. Once this technology maps out our brains to the point where the things we touch, we aren't sure if they're actually there, then think about this. If your brain is convinced that there's a wall in front of you and won't let you move your hand further than that wall, then that wall is actually there because your brain interprets it as being there. So why would there be prisons in the future if it is as simple as implanting a chip in someone's head that disables them from moving? There is no free will in this singularity if the people that invent this inevitably developing technology, something that is going to be part of our everyday lives because it is the solution to all of our problems, if the people that gain their hands on it first have the intention of trapping us in internal torture, this sort of, I have no mouth and I'm a scream AM style torture, if they want to do it, they will. And why wouldn't they? Sorry, I went on a huge tangent there, but I believe it answers Flying Kabbalah's question in a very intricate way. It is not the point that this technology has a cost to it. The people who are trying to work on it have infinite money and infinite resources. Elon Musk is someone who I believe in many ways is autistic, but he believes in these concepts because he knows, I don't know how, but he knows that the elites are working on them. He inevitably wants to publicize it because that is the number one way to get ahead. That is the number one way to put your face out there and say, I am a prophet. I predicted all of this. I believe that is the reason why he started Neuralink and started seeking public investing. Because all these companies developing brain-computer interfaces are associated in some way with the military-industrial complex. And Neuralink is just the first public company to do this. Just as SpaceX was the first public company or private company that is open to the public eye and public investors to prioritize space travel. Inevitably, there are going to be other companies around the world that do this for much cheaper because the people that have an interest in this have infinite resources, infinite fucking money. It doesn't matter how expensive it is because inevitably, as they figure out new ways to manufacture these brain chips, they will become less expensive. It's just about how much do they know about how the human brain works in order to implement this.
Yeah, Jake, what you said about this virtual reality essentially becoming its own predominant form of reality, that really reminds me actually of what Baudrillard said. We talked about him on the AI podcast.
Yep.
But what Baudrillard said back in the 80s about how we see the emergence of this hyper reality as a result of the proliferation of replications and simulations of the reality to the extent that they actually become more real than real. I think that was the terminology that he used to describe it. So yes, they become in a sense the new reality, this hyper reality. So this is actually a process that probably antedates the development of even the internet. I think you can trace it back to mass media. But I do really want to dive deep into Baudrillard's philosophy because I think it's extremely relevant to what you're talking about here. But before I do that, I just want to because I think as the viewer may have noticed, we had a new guest join in just now. So I wanted to introduce John David actually because he just hopped into the call about a couple of minutes ago, and I know he's chomping at the bit to say
John
something.
David from the first podcast. Yep.
Yes, he's from the AI podcast. He made an excellent contribution, and I notified him actually not that long ago that we'd be talking about Neuralink. Yeah, exactly. That we'd be talking about Neuralink and the brain-computer interface and things of that sort, and he was extremely interested in talking about those types of topics. So, John David, go ahead, man. Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Knock that shit off because my ears just exploded.
All right, what's good, everybody? It's John David. That's all I gotta say. But actually, okay, first off, let's get straight into it. I really want to respond to Jacob by saying two things. First off, the way he describes it very much parallels the Mark of the Beast description. I'm just saying. The second thing I gotta say, movies used to be black and white with no audio. Then they turned into color with audio, and then that became like the predominant form of like media that humans consumed. I'm thinking the next thing based off what Jacob said could be when you look at movies, but you can actually feel emotions from movies. Like in the editing process, if they put like emotions you could feel. And I'm thinking if that thing could be like Web 4.0.
My AI girlfriend is going to be real. Once they put this stuff into like the sensory descriptions that we have in our brains, once they integrate it, right? What is going to be the difference between what is real and what I perceive to be real? It is going to be
Web
nothing.
4.0.
First, we have radio. Then we have television. Then we have, computers, video games, the internet. Where do you think this is going to branch out? Things just keep getting more and more and more real, right? So who's to say if there is a thing in my head telling me that there is a thick goth mummy GF in my bed, who is to say that that is not what's actually happening? And if that brain chip is embedded in your brain when you're a child, and it continues with you for your entire life, as it probably will, with Generation Alpha and the generation after it, who is to say that that reality that they're experiencing is not the reality that is in actuality?
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's the same underlying essence behind all of these different processes and these different technologies, right? You mentioned radio, TV; those are earlier forms. Now we see the internet. Now we're seeing it's becoming even more extreme with AI and then virtual reality headsets, where we can just completely escape reality entirely. Enter this metaverse, as Zuckerberg called it. That represents the same phenomenon. It's the same essence and the same drive, I think, to create replications and simulations of reality that are also, in a sense, much more materially comfortable, and they lack the actual struggle that I think is innate to the real flesh and blood world, and so that's why they're so easy to fall into, to sink into. But this process is just accelerating, right, to the point where, as you said, we've reached a point a long time ago where representations of reality begin to outweigh reality itself, to become more predominant, more real, hyper real in a sense. But now it's just becoming even more extreme because, I sent this in the group chat before we started recording, but there was this philosopher, he's generally regarded as a political philosopher, but he talks about many different subfields of philosophy and intellectual activity in general, Robert Nozick. And so he came up with this thought experiment of the pleasure machine, which essentially says, well, let's say that you could plug into this machine that would just enable you to feel infinite pleasure all of the time. You're constantly stimulated, so that means you're never bored. That means that you never experience pain. I presume that you'd have immortality in this type of system, which, by the way, is the direction that technology is actually going in, medical technology. And I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this, on how transhumanism connects to this, right, to the virtualization of reality. Because it does seem to, again, they seem to share the same sort of essence, like the same, outlook on reality and on life, right? And so in that pleasure machine, you can just experience infinite pleasure 24/7 all the time. And so he asks the reader, he says, would you enter that pleasure machine, right? And I hope that, now I obviously would say no, as a humanist, as someone that...
I will.
You will, okay. Well,
I will enter the pleasure machine.
What
as someone that like Flying Kabbalah, and I guess John David, from what it looks like too, we're humanists. We value the human condition, human experience. We want to stay like this. We don't want to just shed. We don't want to artificially extend our lifespans, right, mortality, and in all of these transhumanist utopian visions because we want to preserve our humanity, right? That's what I hope most people will go down that route. But the problem is most people have been so thoroughly sedated and placated by this mass technology that now they crave pleasure above all else, and it seems like they're gonna strap in to the machine, and they're gonna get AI hand jobs and shit. I mean,
they are going to beam Goth Mommy GS onto my dick.
VR hand jobs to add a bit of comedy here, but. It
is not comedy. It is not comedy when we see this happening in the near future. Because when you have these people walking around, that is what they believe. That is what they think there's going to happen, and they're inevitably going to plug in. They're inevitably going to let these technologies take over them in the way that they think.
It's a tragedy and it's real, but yeah.
No, everything Jordan is saying is grounded in realism because there's this science lab you can look into, and they're working for DARPA, but what they're doing is they're manipulating like the neurons in your mind, and they've already tested this on rats and it's worked. But by manipulating the neurons in your mind that are responsible for like what you see and the images you produce, you can actually make a mouse be viewing a fake reality. So instead of a VR headset that you look at through your eyes, you can instead have like this chip form of view of reality that's like literally real. Like you don't perceive it as like a fake reality you're in, but it's like what you actually consider as reality, which you guys could get into,
It all starts with mice, doesn't it? It all starts with mice in the lab, and then they put this shit onto humans. Flowers for Algernon type shit.
Yeah, but they're already working on it, and they're saying, because it's going to be good for, like, patients, and we have to develop this, and it's very recent that they actually came out with this.
Yeah,
I think it was, like, a couple months ago.
I can imagine,
and if you manipulate the neurons, you can manipulate pleasure responses, your visual feed, your audio, anything sensory. It's like, it's so crazy.
Yep.
The thing is, it's really frightening to me, though. It's really scary. Like, I hope that it's just so dehumanizing. I think that's the problem, because if you can just if you can just plug into the pleasure machine whenever you want, right? If this actually proliferates and becomes accessible to the public, which Jacob, like you said, at this point, it's not even just, I agree with you on this. It's not a matter because, Flying Kabbalah brought up earlier, well, it's not going to be accessible to the public, so we don't really have to worry about this. But, in sociology, there's this concept of hierarchical diffusion, right? Where the conscious efforts of the elites, by virtue of their status in the hierarchy, right, in the social hierarchy and the political hierarchy, their actions take precedence over the actions of the common people, of the masses, and everything is essentially downstream of them. So the individual actions and whims and the capabilities, like monetary capabilities of the people, the middle class, maybe the lower class too, is not really as significant in this case as the conscious efforts of the elites. So that's why it's not a matter of. I don't really agree with the idea that that we can stave this off because most people are either not going to be able to afford it or not going to be interested in it. For one, I do think that many people would legitimately hop into plug into a pleasure machine like this.
Yeah, I agree.
It's even if it's not immediately affordable, that's not really that significant just because of how quickly it could still proliferate as a result of elite pushes, basically. The elites pushing this on the people. Right. And then once that happens, I don't want to say that it's going to be inevitable because I do think that there's some people that would still push back against it.
I agree.
At the same time, though, I think a sufficient number of people will plug in to this, basically this new mediated reality.
Yeah, well, some definitely will.
You'll literally see people disappear from real life. And the societal implications are absolutely enormous.
Right. I mean, it is basically like plugging into the Matrix. I mean, literally plugging into the Matrix. And then just being able... I mean, you basically enslave yourself to the machine right after you do that because... I mean, if they can manage your reality, then you've basically died, basically.
But Jacob, you said that you actually... I'm not sure if you're joking out. You said that you would plug into the pleasure machine.
Yes.
So to speak.
Because I think it's stupid of any of us to say that on the basis of our ethics and our morals, we wouldn't do it. I think there's a huge segment of the population that says, once they put these chips in our heads, I'm just going to not do it. Listen, why do you have a phone? Phones are bad for you. You know that phones are bad for you. But all of your family is inside your phone. How do you contact them when they're away? You need your phone to do it. How are you going to get a girlfriend if you don't have a phone? If you can't text her, if you can't call her, why do you use Instagram? Well, because social media is the way to plug into the rest of the world. It's the thing that everyone else is doing. Humans are social creatures. There is going to be a segment of the population that will be convinced to use this technology for one reason or another. Maybe they have bad eyesight and the technology instantly corrects that. Maybe they're lonely and the technology no longer makes them feel lonely. Maybe it solves mental health issues. Maybe it helps you get a job. And these people are slowly going to adopt it, just like they adopted masks during COVID. Everybody else is doing it, so I'm going to start doing it. There's no reason to do your own research because sooner or later you'll have to do it anyways. And so this slow rollout process will begin, and the rest of us will be trapped. Because just as the same way you can't be a hermit and go and throw your phone away, Ted Kaye style, and go into the wilderness without facing some extreme issues, the same way this technology is going to be integrated into our society. Brain-computer interfaces are inevitable. It is just a question of who gets access to this technology first, and what are they going to do with it. That's my biggest concern.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. You're saying that you think these technologies would slowly proliferate to the point where, we'd face massive social pressure, if not requisites to use them.
Right, and you can say for ethical or for moral reasons, I wouldn't plug into the Neuralink, I wouldn't plug into the pleasure machine. But listen, if everybody else is doing it, you will feel morally justified.
So you're adopting the realist perspective essentially. So if we detach ourselves from these idealistic and ethical considerations and look at the pragmatic reality, it's something that we're going to have to accept essentially. That's actually something that I agree with in a sense, because when you think about the emergence of the internet, now more people are becoming more and more cognizant of the realities of the internet, of its effects on people's mental health and prosperity. More and more people recognize that it's bad. Well, in the most, to put it succinctly in a simple format, that it has negative effects on our mental health and our life. But at the same time, it's a requisite of just living in society, because you need it for to gain a job. You need to go to school. You need to contact other people, right? Banks and these types of institutions heavily manage their operations, and they use it as a sort of as a tool of mediation, right? It's just an essential part of life. You need the internet to function nowadays, in at least modern Western society. And even though it wasn't always like that, and maybe some people. I'm assuming that in the 90s, maybe the late 90s, when the internet first started to proliferate to the actual civilian population and beyond just the military, there were probably some people that pushed back against that said, no, this is going to atomize people. It's going to make this very individualistic society. There were definitely people that were concerned about the effects of the internet, right? There have always been people with more Luddistic, if that's even a word, but a more neo-Luddite mindset, right? Of course. And that's what Ted Kaye was all about, right? But it is true, and it's both interesting and disturbing at the same time, that all of those people, no matter the brilliance of their philosophical thinking, how intelligent they were, how outspoken they were, they ultimately fell by the wayside. History just progressed beyond them and had no use for them, and they lost in a sense, because the internet did arise and it did proliferate, and now it's become just an intrinsic, extremely omnipresent part of life. And when you think about it, we now are actually in the same position as those naysayers of the internet were in the 1990s.
Yep.
I think that's what we're getting at, and that's exactly why it's such a terrifying situation. But I completely agree with you. But the first aspect, though, do you guys think that this will result in any maybe societal rift, right? Because let's say it slowly proliferates, and then certain subsets of the population use it first. Maybe the people that are a lot more introverted, people with mental illnesses. Like maybe, let's say that hospitals start using this to treat clients with depression, because they think, well, the clients are just they're so suicidal and they feel so terrible all the time that we can just plug them into this pleasure machine, and that would technically provide, just a complete fix, right? That would eliminate any, and it would be literally impossible to feel any sort of discomfort and mental discomfort in a system like that. So maybe I actually do foresee medical hospitals using this, because if you look at the state of psychiatry and and medical care, not just the United States but many Western countries, there's not much in terms of a spiritual aspect to this. It's all very mechanical. They absolutely overprescribe pharmaceutical drugs because it's just it functions on a mechanical basis of altering your neurotransmitters and your neurochemical activity. It's essentially the same basis as this virtual reality technology. So I think the logical next step for these big medical corporations and hospitals would be to prescribe. I mean, I literally think this is going to happen. Would be to prescribe VR, like virtual and simulated reality to say clients with depression or chronic pain, because you can't feel chronic pain in a system like that. Like you can't feel mental discomfort. It's literally impossible. It precludes the possibility of that. So we'll see that happen first. But with that being said, though, what if something like this happens? I want to hear your thoughts on this. So there's certain subsets of the population, mental people with illnesses, maybe more introverted, kind of lonely nerds that never were able to talk to people. They don't have good social skills. Kind of like Mark Zuckerberg, the guy actually, is propagating this and promotes this. Those people fall for this trap. They fall into this, but then they have family members and they have some of these other interpersonal relationships. And don't you think that maybe those family members would be very, very alienated from that, and they'd see, okay, this is really disturbing. You'll see some societal rifts occur. The people that accept it, the people that don't accept it. Do you think something like that could occur as maybe like an intermediary stage? Or do you think we're just going to pretty much adopt it immediately, just like the internet? Because there wasn't really an intermediary stage with the internet. It's not like we entered some civil war where 50% of the population were Luddites and the other 50% eagerly accepted it. We essentially, if you look at the history of it, we just went full throttled, unmitigated right into it. Adopted the internet, then we adopted cell phones, and it's just been increasing at an exponential rate ever since. And now we're headed towards the singularity. Or do you think it's going to be more gradual? We'll see like divisions in society. How do you see this progressing? And I guess John David, if you want to step in, because I feel like you have a lot to say. But yeah.
Yeah, so honestly, there was a time when wearing headphones was seen as weird if you go way back. Or even like a girl like half naked on an advertisement would have been like, yo, what the heck? But now you're so desensitized to it because of society. That just shows like how people get accustomed to things, right? But Mr. Beast, he's like, oh, I'd get the Neuralink because of like the work boost productivity.
Do not mention my former employer. I hate whenever people bring him up randomly. Go on.
Okay, all right. No, but as I was saying, so
it's still relevant though.
No, look, I remember I saw this video from Melody Sheep. You guys can go check this out if you want.
Yeah.
It's called The Human Future, A Case for Optimism. And in this video, they showed like as technology really advances, you might see this like self-initiated a next step in evolution where the human species kind of diverges, and then you have the people that want to stay biological, you have the people that choose BCIs and all these things because they're like, oh, okay, I can expand my intelligence. Now I have like 1.8 billion times the intelligence of you guys. And then they can process things faster. They can like self-manipulate their memories, their, what I'm saying? Like things like that.
Exactly, yeah.
So honestly, that sounds enticing to people. And what you said, like that could replace antidepressants, like what you were saying with like the use case there.
Yeah, medical
but,
system.
And people, what was that?
No, I'm just saying, I do think that the medical system will probably start to adopt this within the next, 24 years.
I mean, yeah, they're going to be like, why use antidepressants when this is guaranteed to let you live your dream life and be happy, and you can manipulate the dopamine thing directly and just like over and over and over. Like, they're, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
I do think that on a long enough time period, a lot of people will choose this, but there will be people that choose to remain biological.
The thing is, though, wouldn't those people essentially turn into second-class citizens?
Yeah, I mean, if they're like,
I have thought about that. You want to know the craziest thing I thought about one time is that, people say, oh, AI might take over. I was thinking, what if it's humans that use AI to empower themselves, and then you actually have like these type 1 and type 2 humans?
That's what's
like
going to
think
happen.
of it like the
That's
Neanderthals.
what they're trying to do, man.
Like think of like the Neanderthals, and I think it was Homo erectus or something like that. But if you have this more advanced like class of humans that are like biologically augmented and engineered. They have faster processing capability. They can outsmart you. It's actually not an advanced AI that maybe we have to like be like scared of or something, but a species of humans, like a class of humans that just augmented themselves so above. And then all these people that like want to stay, you know, eating food and going to sleep at a specific time and not getting BCIs, you know?
Yeah, it's just. I mean, John David, would you accept the transhumanist technologies? Would you plug yourself in or no?
Wait, can you say that a little louder?
Would you plug into the pleasure machine or no? Would you want to stay biological?
I would not plug into the pleasure
I'm
machine.
plugging into the pleasure machine. I'm doing it. You
Bro,
guys
you
suck.
have to choose. You have to choose real baddies, bro.
I don't know.
Yeah, Killionaire hasn't spoken in like an hour. Let him talk.
Yeah, Killionaire.
Yeah.
With John David, we have a Killionaire.
Yeah.
He's our Canadian friend, so he's the first time.
Yeah, I don't know about the pleasure machine because I'm not trying to be like, oh, Debbie Downer. I'm so my life sucks and whatever. But like I have a lot of mental illnesses, and not a lot, but I have like a slew, and I don't know. I would I rather like live in like ignorant bliss and just like complete just hedonistic pleasure, or would I rather like go outside and watch my society crumble and interact with people I hate, live amongst people I hate, experience things I hate, and just live this like this human lifestyle just for the sake of like being a human and experiencing all this span of human emotions, all the pain, all the suffering, all of that. Like, does that necessarily make us not human? But like, I don't know. I don't know if I'd.
No, dude, what you're saying, that's exactly why I think so many people are going to get like a BCI or some type of escapism.
Yeah.
Like in Ready Player One, like when you can be Batman, you can do this, you can just live your dream life, have all the women, you can feel all these things. Like, why would people not want that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
that's why I honestly see this just being like a big society takeover.
Yeah, for sure.
Also,
but like, I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know where I'd land, because like there's a lot of aspects of the pleasure machine that like seem appealing to me, but also like in the pleasure machine I also can't like get up and shower and then go down to the lake and just like look at the fucking lake all day, because that's the thing I do. It's like I'm never gonna be able to do that within like a pleasure machine. I'll have like the simulated version of it, but I'll never get to do that in real life. I feel like real human pleasures that you experience will be way more valuable and meaningful than the pleasures you experience in the pleasure machine. You know what I mean? But do those pleasures necessarily justify all the other like indignancy? I don't know the word, but like all the other negative aspects of life. I don't know. So I don't know what I'd do, honestly. Like maybe if I got to the point, yeah, I'd plug in the machine. But as far as I know,
I'm gonna correct what I said. Maybe.
Wait, yeah, let John David go first, and then.
It's gonna be quick. I just want to say that maybe this is not a massive society takeover type thing. Maybe people use it like a couple hours a day, like video games. Maybe people use it a lot, and then they're like, "Bro, F this. This isn't real life," and they have like this pullback. You know what I'm saying? Like out of this like confusion, maybe it's like an innate primal subconscious thing. Like everyone just says like F it, let's go back to reality. Like I don't know. I just want to correct that.
Yeah, that happens to me today even. Like I don't play video games almost at all anymore, but even when I do play video games, it's like I'm always, when I'm playing video games, I'm always kind of just dreaming about going outside and like hanging out with my friends and shit like that, because I value like real life experiences a lot more than like fictional technological kind of
replication.
Yeah. Even with this, I mean, I really enjoy this conversation, but Right now, I'd prefer to just be talking to you guys in like a fucking cafe or some shit instead of over Discord playing fucking Roblox. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm a very
Humanist, yeah.
not materialistic, but I'm a very I don't know what the word would be like.
I'm guessing humanist.
You're a
Yeah, I
humanist.
guess humanist.
Team
Yeah.
human, that's good.
Preserve the human
Yeah.
condition. Like, you think there's something
Yeah.
valuable about that? You can't just you
Mm.
shouldn't shed that. But yeah, Flying Cabal, go ahead because you said you wanted to say.
Yeah. Also, speaking of opposition just to all these developments, do you think there will be a massive exodus to North Korea?
What?
Why North Korea?
Well, because they didn't.
Because you're saying North Korea is so walled off from
Yeah, exactly.
the world that this technology wouldn't penetrate.
Dude,
North Korea.
in war, I haven't read the book, but I think in World War Z, this is a very pop culture reference. But when there's a fictional book named World War Z where there's a zombie apocalypse, and there is a political claim in there that because North Korea was so walled off, they were one of the only countries that survived, and a bunch of people were just like climbing at the gates of the DMZ to get from South Korea to North Korea because it was like the safe haven on Earth. I think North Korea's entire geopolitical strategy is okay, we're just here walled off from everybody, so if that shit goes down, we're safe. That's why they've developed nuclear weapons, so that nobody targets them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Okay, so you're telling me you want to go to North Korea after the zombie apocalypse?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll be right back. My head sets down. I'll be right back.
Bro, you guys need to trademark that name, The Pleasure Machine. Like
Dude, I want one of those.
the Pleasure Machine.
No, it's this philosopher came up with it. This
Yeah,
guy-
1972.
Oh, for real?
Before my mom was
Yeah.
born.
Well, I thought you guys just like started like rolling off.
No, yeah, because
You're missing an hour of context, John David.
Oh, man.
It wasn't but we've gone to the best material just right now, actually. But killing her left. But no, but the thing is, when it comes to the North Korea example, though, they're not just going to let in hordes of people fleeing. This
Oh, yeah, you're right.
This technological takeover. It's going to be a lot more complicated than that. But would there be people that just are desperately trying to climb over the border, climb over the gates into North Korea? I mean, from China, maybe from... I can imagine it would take over South Korea first because their culture is kind of fucked up, honestly. So I think...
Well, yeah, exactly.
It's more likely, and that's actually how it ties into the geopolitical conflicts that you're talking about in earlier in the first 10 to 20 minutes of the podcast. This technology is more likely to take root in and establish itself in these types of materialistic and desacralized cultures that comprise the Western Atlantis bloc. I mean, I think that's really obvious. It doesn't really need to be stated. But yeah, countries like Japan, I think they'd accept something like this first. I mean, we see actually, we see in Japanese culture in particular, we see they've had this experience for a while. Not this experience, but a phenomenon where Japanese men, the rates of loneliness and mental illness have increased dramatically over the past couple of decades. And that specifically manifests in the fact that just basically abandoning a relationship with a woman, right? More and more Japanese men are single. But it's not just in Japan, it's also in North America and probably in many European countries too. I mean, I haven't looked at the data exactly, but what they did instead as they abandoned relationships is first they utilized these strange services where they basically paid to be sort of female companions. That's how they call it. It's not the term that I came up with because it sounds really strange, but
Yeah, I saw that.
like that's been there for a while. That's they've had that for decades. At least that's physical though. I think what that shows you is certain cultures to maybe more predisposed to really just accepting this technology. I don't want to sound bigoted against Japanese culture or whatever. I mean, I do think it has some weird aspects, to be honest, but I do think that they'd be one of the first cultures to accept this, to be honest. But yeah, compare that to a country like North Korea or China, you could say those are two member states of this Eurasianist bloc, you could say, this counter-hegemonic bloc. They'd be far less likely to accept that. And that just really highlights the geopolitical dimension of this too. When people talk about World War III, that's not, for example, which I'm not sure if you guys think that's going to ever happen, but regardless of whether or not you think it's on the horizon, you can't decouple that from the topic of this technological takeover.
Yeah, you're right.
reality. It's actually deeply interconnected, and that's just what makes it even more, grave and significant. It's like every major crisis that humanity faces today is deeply interconnected on the fundamental level, and that's why I think. I mean, we talked about this on the AI podcast as well. This is the note that we ended off on, but we are living through some really unprecedented times.
Yeah, that's true.
But at the same time, I would say I feel strangely grateful in the sense that it's interesting to see what occurs, and that we live in this time period over all other time periods, right? I mean, every time period, right? Where there was 2 world wars, there was Great Depression, and et cetera, but this is something like we've never seen before. This is a period where, and yeah, we talked about this in the last podcast as well, but where humans, in a sense, are going to be knocked off of the top of the hierarchy of things, the top of the food chain, in a sense. Whether it's from AI or whether it's just for these technological...
Guys, I hate to interrupt. Iran just bombed Israel.
Yeah, I was actually gonna bring that up right now.
Yeah, I literally just saw
Jordan was
breaking
talking.
news. Iran launches drone attack
Yeah.
towards Israel 9 minutes ago.
Yeah, I mean, they said that they would attack them.
Yeah, yesterday there was like the warning thing.
Yeah, they said they would attack a couple of days ago, but that's...
Oh, God.
It's all over.
That's just another instance of the rift, the geopolitical rift that we were talking about the first 10 minutes. Literally occurred within the past 10 minutes. So that's crazy. But,
That's pretty crazy.
Killian are left, but he had a really good momentum going. That's the thing. I want Killian to join back immediately.
Killian said 1 second. He's joining back. Calm down.
Yeah, we were really bouncing ideas off back and forth. Yeah.
Oh, dude, what the hell is going on?
Okay, Killianer's back. What's up, man?
All right, sorry about that.
Yeah,
We were talking about how Iran just started bombing Israel while we were doing this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
9
Wait,
minutes
what?
ago.
Hold on, what?
Iran just started bombing Israel.
Yeah, I feel like you guys know.
Just
I feel
now.
like you guys know a lot about like politics and nations. What do you think's gonna happen after this Israel bombing from Iran?
I don't know because it happened
Like,
several
what is it
minutes
lead
ago.
to?
I'm reading about it right now on my phone.
Like Jordan, what do you think that leads to?
Let's see. Well, this just happened the last hour.
But like I mean like in an extrapolated effect.
I got it.
Oh, they made a Wikipedia page just now. On 13th April 2024, during the Israel-Hamas war, Iran launched an attack on Israel using drones and possibly missiles. They don't know yet. The projectiles have yet to reach Israel. This is the first direct Iranian attack on Israel since 1979. They codenamed the attack, the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps codenamed its attack Operation Truthful Promise. So they launched the rockets and they haven't arrived yet. Israel isn't like DEFCON 1.
Iran just got added to as a belligerent on the Israel-Hamas war.
Yeah, just a second ago. Iran subsequently threatened to attack United States military bases if it intervened that defended Israel.
So this is an attack against Schwab.
Yeah, it's literally page was created 5 minutes ago. Last edited a couple minutes ago. What the hell?
Right, I mean, I'm guessing we'll probably edit this out. I mean, if we survive,
Last edited a couple seconds ago now.
Wait, we're still recording, right?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Because there was just a weird. Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, just weird coincidence.
It's a bit of a sudden transition.
Okay, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Israel all closed their airspace in response to the attacks. Jordan said that it's prepared to shoot down Iranian aircraft that violate its airspace. Contrary to media reports, Jordan did not announce a state of emergency, but Israel did.
We're going to shift to talking about this then, right? Okay, well, here's the thing.
Dude, the Scorpion podcast, whenever we do this stuff, major world events happen. Next Scorpion podcast will go on. We'll talk about AI girlfriends for 30 minutes, and it's just like, DEFCON 1, Russia's bombing us. Yeah.
Well, do you think there'll be a nuclear between Israel and Iran?
No, all these are all psyops. These are all Russian-Ukraine war psyop.
Exactly.
Israel-Palestine war psyop. Now Iran-Israel war. It's a psyop. It's all psyops.
Okay,
But it's still very interesting.
I mean, I'm not really surprised by this because that's what the Iranian government they've been saying for the past couple of weeks. We are going to launch a retaliatory attack on Israel. I think I think it was last week they said that, maybe 4 days ago, they said within the next day we will launch this attack. And it took a bit longer than a day, obviously, but now it looks like it's unfolding. But all the rock, it looks like.
Wait, Jordan, can you talk a little louder?
Yeah, okay, here's what I'll say, right? I do think that this has been in the works for a while, though, right? Because first of all, if you go back to the October 7th conflict, right, which was technically initiated by Hamas and also some other Palestinian militant groups that weren't talked about with the same frequency, right? So groups like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, there's different militant groups that have bases of operations not just within the occupied territories but outside of it, right? So they receive actually significant funding from Iran. That's one key aspect that binds them all together. But otherwise, they're quite many of them are actually quite ideologically opposed to each other, right? So the PFLP, for example, they adhere to this secular Marxist-Leninist ideology, whereas Hamas and PIJ, that's Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they're more theologically based, they're Islamist. They've actually been at each other's throats in the past, but the one thing that's kept them together, not the only aspect, is significant Iranian funding, right? And they've also received funding throughout history from different states that are now very strong allies of Iran, such as Syria, right? So Syria actually provided refuge and a sanctuary for many members and leaders of those three groups in Damascus, which is the Syrian capital, for many years. Even though in their relations with Hamas actually went south for a brief period, mainly because of the Syrian civil war in which Hamas backed, or at least expressed support for the Syrian.
Yeah, Iran claims that it did this, by the way, because Israel bombed their embassy, allegedly. I don't know much about the situation.
Yeah, so that caused a brief souring relations between Hamas and Syria, but we saw the October 7th attack was actually so significant and it marked such a dramatic change that even the government in Damascus, the Syrian government, was willing to somewhat reinstate, not completely, not officially, but move somewhat closer to Hamas, restoring that original relationship, even though they're really at odds with each other, right? Syrian government secular and Hamas is an Islamist group, but all these groups are united really in opposition to Israel, which is, they perceive it as this imperialistic sort of Atlanticist colony on their indigenous lands, right? So they want to combat Israel. And that's why there's this term that we've seen that's becoming more popular. It's called the axis of resistance, right? So it's this Middle Eastern political alliance that comprises states like Iran, Syria, now Iraq, even though for a while, because of the Houthis, because of the U.S. invasion, Iraq was in a sense on the U.S. side, technically, the government that they installed. That actually has been dramatically overturned a couple of months ago. And this is really reflecting the big shift in the Middle East. The power, I think, is actually shifting in the opposite direction. It's shifting to the axis of resistance. That's what this new attack represents. And for instance, we saw a couple of months ago, so I think this was in December 2023, the Iraqi president, I forgot his name, but he actually announced that the country was officially shutting down and removing the American military presence on Iraqi soil. Because even though we pulled out our troops from Iraq a long time ago, we started the troop reduction in 2007 and we kept intermittently reducing it afterwards.
Well, the U.S. still has about.
That was on paper because we actually still kept contractors for first of all, members of groups like Blackwater, which are just these private paramilitaries. It's funny because we attack Russia all the time for utilizing paramilitaries like Wagner because they're unaccountable and they perpetrate all these brutal acts. Well, the U.S. actually did the same thing with Blackwater. So we kept those Blackwater troops in there for a while. We slowly even scaled back the Blackwater presence, but then we just maintain these bases, right? Well, even those bases are actually being removed right now. Iraqi government has been spearheading initiative to remove them. That's signaling that it's shifting closer towards the Iranian pole. This Iranian-led pole is strengthening significantly. That's what I think has been occurring over the past couple of months, and that's what I think this round of Iranian attacks on Israel actually represents. Right? They're much more bold now. They're fiercely in opposition to this, this U.S. or this American-led or Western bloc, which Israel is a part of, and they're striking back at it. And this is a fundamental geopolitical rift of the 21st century just manifesting before our eyes. That's what I think has happened. Now, what I think will happen from here, right? Well, first of all, I just saw some news that Hezbollah Salvo just accompany these attacks. I mean, this is extremely recent news, breaking news, just like 15 minutes ago. So Hezbollah is another militant group. I mean, if the viewers are probably familiar with Hezbollah, but
You're right.
yes, they are. They're a Lebanese Shia group, and they were formed in the 80s in response to the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon. So this very, particularist local struggle, and now they've embraced ties with countries like Iran and Syria because they're united in this common, in the face of this common threat. So Hezbollah just launched a salvo. That's going to make this an even more that's going to add to the intricacy of this. And Iran's threatening to retaliate by strike. Yeah, Flying Kabbalah just sent in the chat that they said they fired. Well, that was from a day ago actually, but they're firing another salvo right now as we speak. Iran said that they're going to retaliate also against U.S. military bases. Well, they've been doing that because Jacob, you brought that up. They've been doing that since October 7th. They've been increasing the number of strikes on U.S. military bases in Iraq and Syria. So that's already been happening. But I think that's going to escalate from here. And will it result in a full-blown direct confrontation? I mean, I'm not entirely sure because in January 2020, when Soleimani was assassinated by the U.S., right? Everyone predicted that it would result in this massive flare-up, this huge conflagration, and people said, well, I'm not sure if this will be significant enough. I mean, it is extremely significant, of course. I'm not sure if it'll be inflammatory just quite enough to result in something like that. I mean,
Right.
Saddam fired. Well, at the time we did have somewhat closer ties to them, but Saddam fired the Scud missiles into Israel throughout the 90s, and we didn't see this major sort of global, chain or domino effect. Actually, at the same time, I think the chances of something like that type of domino effect occurring now, right? What I mean by domino effect is so Iran just launched these strikes on Israel. Hezbollah is joining them. Some other groups from the Axis of Resistance might join them, like launch more rocket attacks like Hamas, PIJ, etc., etc. Other states might launch more attacks potentially, which results in a back and forth. So then you have, America launches its own strikes and just escalates to more and more deaths.
Yeah, it'll probably escalate like that.
That actually might happen. I do think that's likely to happen right now. But I just think what we're going to see essentially is an escalation of the processes that we've been seeing for the past couple of months. This is, even though this seems really extreme and unprecedented, it's just an escalation of the same fundamental processes. So that's how I answer that question. But at the same time, I mean, it just shows that the rift between these two blocks that we were talking about in the first 10 minutes, the Eurasianist Atlanticist blocks, you call them, is becoming more and more apparent, right? Because in the past, Russia and China, actually, they might not necessarily have had such a unified position on the, for example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But because of the, this increasing bifurcation that we're seeing in the world, they're more likely right now to be staunchly allied with Iran, actually, and union with Iran. And that just creates an even more dangerous situation for everyone involved. So that's what I'd say. I mean, I know I talked for a long time there. But yeah, that's what I think is going to happen. I mean, it's not, we've gone far away from Neuralink and topics like that. But,
yeah, you're right. I mean, I would say we could still just tie that in with opposition to Neuralink and
as I said,
virtual reality.
It's extremely interconnected, obviously.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I do think that Islamist governments in general, I mean, Islamism is literally thinking that Islam ought to be the law of, the geopolitical polity that you're in charge of. That means that Islamic scripture, so Hadith, Quran, all of that Sharia ought to trump everything exterior to that. So, for instance, technology. So if that, and I mean, I can't really imagine that, leaders or ideologues of a lot of these geopolitical movements that are out, pretty much have their allegiance to the axis of resistance, as you said. So Hezbollah, Iran, Houthis, Syria, etc. So, I mean, I guess you can count Afghanistan as well, but it's, I guess more further.
They're a bit more nebulous, and they haven't always, I'd say the Taliban hasn't always had the most concrete or positive relations with those groups, but they are, because they're seeing this sort of geopolitical bifurcation that's occurring in the world, they're going to be pushed closer to this, we could say Eurasianist bloc in a sense.
Yeah, you're right.
Flying Kabbalah, before you respond, Killionaire wanted to speak?
Yeah, because let him. Yeah, kill it.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for having me on and everything, but I'm gonna get going. I can't really just sit at a desk for 3 hours. But yeah,
no problem.
it's been a very good conversation. It's been very good to participate in and listen to. I'm very much open to reappearing in the future, and yeah, it was a good talk.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Good meeting you, man.
likewise,
Thank you
Sam.
for coming, man.
Yeah, thank you for joining the
Meeting you,
podcast, and
Yeah, of course.
yeah, we appreciate the insights that you've given us this far.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Anyways, I'm gonna go.
Yes,
See you
yeah.
guys.
Okay. All right.
All right, so yeah, speaking just about Islamism in general, I mean, it's difficult to, as I was saying, to imagine these, I guess, Islamist leaders to just accept this ideology, or to be, to have a pro position towards it, if that makes sense.
That was we were actually talking about this, I think, in a phone call not too long ago. That was the essence of the Iranian Revolution in 1970.
Yeah, and because
Iranian intellectuals.
yeah, I believe your book will, definitely discuss the fact that.
I wrote a very long essay on that, which you can find on my Substack, about the Iranian Revolution and its.
Yeah, exactly, because there were. So I mean, I know Ali Shariati, but there were also two major ones that were also discussed in the book that you sent to me, and I believe one of them also has read Heidegger and assumed the same humanistic thinking that Heidegger holds.
The book that you're talking about, is that the book by that Professor Mohageg?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, he talks about that. Yeah, that's a great book, actually. I recommend that to everyone who's watching this podcast right now. It's called Insurgent Poet Mystic Sectarian. Fascinating book about the Middle Eastern philosophy and this counter force that we're seeing develop in Iran, essentially, and how that dates back to the Iranian Revolution. Yeah, that's a great book. But I actually, before I'll let you go after this, but I want to get that guy, that professor on the podcast. I think it'd be a great guest. But
oh yeah,
that being said, just go ahead. Yeah, finish up your point because you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so just considering how their Islamic doctrine is, so to speak, to the people in charge of them. So, Hezbollah, that's, Islamist. Iran is Islamist. Afghanistan is Islamist. The Houthi movement, which is in charge of most of the population of Yemen by now, because most of it lives in the western part. They're Islamist. Hamas as well is an Islamist organization, but they don't really have very stable political control. But whatever.
I'd actually also argue that Hezbollah is a much more effective political actor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hamas is a bit of a. I know some people think that they're the vanguard.
Well, anyways,
with that, they actually have some suspicious origins in British intelligence, but that's kind of a long story. We can go into that some other time. But
I do think that Islam and just
I wanted to add. Can I just add one brief comment though? So here's my take on things. I actually think that Hezbollah, even though they didn't directly initiate, for example, the October 7th attack, right, on 2023 last year, I think they're actually a much more effective fighting force against Israel. And I'm not even necessarily speaking from a normative approach here. I'm not saying this is for the better. I'm saying this is the
exactly
matter. That they are a more effective fighting force against Israel compared to Hamas. And I think that's been borne out extensively in the historical record. Because if you look at the major blows that have been dealt to Israel, by its neighbors in the past 30, 40 years, Hezbollah constitutes one of their strongest opponents. Because who pushed out Israel from South Lebanon in 2006? And
exactly, yep.
Was Hezbollah. And they were significantly outnumbered, and they even had to use some asymmetrical warfare tactics, kind of like Hamas does. But even with that being said, they still pushed out Israel. And it was a really impressive. From a military strategic perspective, that was a really impressive victory, right? And it goes back to their origins too. I think Hezbollah is just a more effective faction because, for one, their membership is a lot older and much more experienced, right? the current leader of, and also they seem much more dedicated to the cause, I think, and much more in touch with the populace, right? Because we know, there is a lot of propaganda in the West that Hezbollah is just a ragtag band of terrorists, which is complete, and that has no sort of grounding in Lebanese society, which is completely not true. And anyone who knows anything about Lebanese politics and society, or who lives in Lebanon, will tell you that's not true. Because Hezbollah actually enjoys a significant degree of support from the Lebanese people, from a great subset of the Lebanese population, and because they function not just as a militant force that has, resisted Israel successfully in conflicts like in 2006, but they actually provide significant social services to the Lebanese population. They provided housing, healthcare, medical assistance. They function as a political party in a sense. So there's actually a strongly democratic basis to Hezbollah that people don't really talk about, at least not in the West. I mean, I'm sure if you turn on Press TV, which is Iranian state TV, you'd be more likely to hear about that. But that's something that has garnered them a significant degree of support in Lebanon, which makes them all the more difficult to root out, for those people who would like to see them rooted out. And, another factor there is that because of that, they're much more well organized than Hamas. They have superior weaponry, they generally have superior military strategy. We're probably going to see that unfold actually over the next couple of days with this new Iranian launched offensive. But I just think Hezbollah is a much more effective fighting force against Hamas than Hamas for those reasons. Also, the Hamas membership is much younger. We've seen actually even Generation Z, Zoomer Palestinians are flocking to Hamas in droves in the past, or have flocked to Hamas in droves over the past couple of years, and they're not necessarily. Some of them might be more opportunistic. Some of them might be more fanatical because they see it as an opportunity to take up arms and to add a sense of struggle to their life. Some of them may just think that it's the thing to do. It's just what one does. But with that being said, by virtue of the fact that they're much younger than say the average soldier of Hezbollah, that inherently reduces, I think, the military edge that they could otherwise have. Right? Younger soldiers just aren't typically the best fighters. So Hezbollah's
just definitely not experienced.
What I wanted to add too is, even if you ignore the historical roots where, Hamas originated as essentially an offshoot as a Palestinian offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood actually had ties to British intelligence, strong ties to British intelligence, because what I've talked about extensively, I read about this in my book, is we see that Western governments have always utilized this tactic that I called weaponization, right? Where they will locate the most extreme fanatic factions, especially factions with more universalistic aspirations, like for example ISIS or Al Qaeda, where the goal, it wasn't this local particular struggle. The goal was to wage global jihad, and as they would phrase it, to essentially conquer the entire world and subsume into this Islamic polity. Those types of organizations are much more likely to be both located and then actually funded and financed by these Western intelligence agencies, because they can be very effective forces against the geopolitical powers that they'd like to combat, right? That's a key strategy that I think they've been utilizing for the past couple of decades, and I think it continues to unfold actually it will continue to unfold over the next maybe the next decade or maybe even beyond that, right? We saw that with Azov Battalion, these extreme factions fighting on the side of Ukraine, with very suspicious ties to Western intelligence. That's an example of the strategy. We saw that in the Syrian civil war, where the CIA had this operation called Operation Timber Sycamore, which is essentially where they gave a significant quantity of funding and arms to these so-called moderate rebels that turned out to be not so moderate after all, because among them was a sizable contingent of actually Al Qaeda fighters, but specifically operating through Al Qaeda's Syrian front, which is called the Al Nusra Front, or Jabhat al Nusra. So we see this time and time again, and in the Russia-Ukraine war, the purpose of that strategy is, we weaponize those extremists and those terrorists to fight against Russia, because they're considered to be more significant than the larger enemy. In the case of the Syrian civil war, you see that those groups like the FSA, Al Nusra Front, and even some groups that maybe weren't direct recipients of the funding, but that nonetheless indirectly received it, just because when you give weapons, for example, to a militant group, especially maybe a more fanatic militant group, they're very likely to flow and diffuse and end up in the hands of other militant groups that might actually be fighting a separate struggle or might even be opposed to them. So that was what made the Syrian intervention all the more just deadly and I think destructive, because we sent funding to not only directly to groups like FSA and even al-Nusra, but that funding and those arms that we sent ended up in the hands of even more brutal factions, like for example ISIS. And with that in mind, well, those groups were waging a struggle against the Syrian government, which is led by Bashar al-Assad, the Ba'athist government, which is member of the Axis of Resistance, a very, very strong ally of Russia, right? Russia and Iran. I mean, that's why Russia intervened in the war in the first place, was to secure their ally, right? Secure their strongest Middle Eastern ally. So this tactic of weaponization is specifically being utilized as a tool, as a means of combating this Eurasian bloc. It's a very, very prominent foreign policy strategy that I think the West has almost perfected and that they keep continuing to utilize. And Hamas, in a sense, has origins in that type of strategy. And I don't think that, I think it'd be way too conspiratorial to say that they still do, maintain links to Western intelligence. I don't think that October 7th was some psyop or whatever. But at the same time, that does add a layer of suspicion, I'd say, that is absent in Hezbollah. Because if you look at the origins of Hezbollah, they originated in the 1980s in opposition to Israel.
When Israel invaded South Lebanon.
Yeah, occupation of South Lebanon started in 85, so they were a local struggle. And they even cooperated with some other Shia groups at the time, like Amal, I think that was another one. But there was some infighting between them, but that's besides the point. Because the fundamental point is there was a local, particular struggle. Right. That received also funding originally from Iran and Syria, and it continues to receive funding from them, and that's why they're a much more reliable and effective force against Israel. And that ties into actually the broader nature of this dialectic that we're seeing unfold, of West versus East in a sense, because many people will point out when they're responding, for example, to Dugin's argument, who says, well, there's this Eurasian bloc and they're united by the same philosophical principles, ideological principles, right? They'll try to rebut that by saying, well, isn't it true, though, that we see a great deal of heterogeneity among the different powers that comprise the Eurasian bloc, right? They're all exhibit a great degree of cultural variance, right? Russia is not identical culturally to Iran. Iran is not identical culturally to China. Right. In Iran, we see it's this Islamic Shia theocracy. Russia, even though Islam has its place in Russia, is at least nominally an Orthodox Christian country, and I'd say beyond nominally Orthodox Christianity plays a significant role in shaping Russian identity. Yeah, exactly. Has close ties to the Russian state. But then we see, in contrast, China is this secular state, and it was founded on Marxist principles. They're supposed to propagate a principle of state atheism. So the average person who disagrees with Dugin, for example, on that, he'd say, well, this is an incoherent theory because we see these contrasting cultural and religious forms. How can you reconcile that, right? Well, here's my response to that, because I'm not sure if Dugin's ever fleshed this out actually in like a very concrete way. So I'll do his job for him essentially, because I do think he's completely right nonetheless. Those differences only reflect a fundamental and underlying commonality, which is what I call particularity. So yes, it may be the case that we see specific, interstate differences in terms of religion and culture, but underlying each religion and culture is the same traditionalist philosophy, right? I mean, we've talked about perennialism, right, on the first podcast, which is a philosophical viewpoint propagated by people like Guénon and Schuon, that all religions share the same metaphysical truth, and that's why they have many of the same common principles and ideas, which I do agree with to a certain extent. I mean, I don't think that the religions are identical to each other, and I don't think that that's necessarily embodied, that, the specific philosophy of perennialism is embodied by these countries. I don't think that's specifically the case, because, the Chinese government does engage in some clashes, for example, with its Muslim minorities. Right. And that's not just because they're Muslims, that's also because of the strategy of weaponization, right? Because, the US deep state has incited these, Uyghur terrorists.
Yeah, the Uyghur pipeline.
Yeah, the Turkestan Islamic Party, which actually, by the way, fought in Syria as well. And we helped facilitate that against the Syrian government. So that's an interesting intersection that you guys could look into. So that's a result of weaponization, and which is why the idea that China is waging some universal struggle against its Muslim population is obviously not true, because the Hui Muslims form a significant subset of the population. They actually enjoy fairly stable and amicable relations with the Chinese state. That's not what's happening. It's a reaction to sort of imperialistic tricks on behalf of the West. But with that being said, underlying these seemingly disparate systems is it's the same traditionalist principles. And I think you can even be more specific than that and call it particulars, right? Because that's also what Dugin talks about, how globalization homogenizes humanity. It takes us from the particular, so that could be, specific religious background, an ethnic background, a geographical or territorial loyalty. It uproots us from those loyalties and commands us to submit to the universal homogeneous state, right? To the these legal principles that we see, for example, what I described earlier with the extrapolation of the civic nation to all of humanity, which is the end goal, I think, of these technocrats that are in power right now. That's universalism. That's the core of the West right now, essentially. These powers, okay, you might see some interstate variation. They're all in opposition to that. That is their common enemy. They're all underpinned by a particular struggle. Because think about it. What is, for example, what do Orthodox Christianity, like devout Orthodox Christianity, the devout Shia Islam that we see in Iran, and in China, we see that they're actually gathering around their own ethno-nationalist principle, their own particularist principle of ethno-nationalism. That's what I'd argue the direction that China is going in. What those all have in common is a particularity. So it's basically saying we're rooted in a specific identity that cannot be extrapolated to just all of humanity, regardless of any sort of any other distinctions that could preclude that, right? Yep. It can't be universalized. And you can say, well, isn't it the case, however, that Christianity and Islam are universalistic religions? Because say anyone can convert to those religions. Well, first of all, in this specific context, they're being used as tools of particularity, right? They're being used to say, no, we want to preserve this specific identity, which is very specific and innate and primordial to our people in the face of this universalism. So you have to think about this from you can almost think about this from, I'm not a Marxist, but you can think about this using the dialectical materialist lens, right? Because no, we shouldn't just be trapped in these ideational constructs which say that Islam and Christianity are universalists inherently. You have to look at the actual material reality in which they operate. And right now they're operating in an anti-universal fashion, which takes precedence. And then furthermore, they still operate, even besides that, they operate in a particularistic fashion because they're about differentiation. Because that's the core of these religions like devout Shia Islam and devout Orthodox Christianity. It's about differentiation, saying we have these practices that are ancient and primordial and that are constantly in threat of either subjugation or outright extinction. Right? Think about warrior saints in Orthodox Christianity. Why does Orthodox Christianity iconicize warriors and martyrs? And Islam also, there's a rich tradition of martyrdom in Islam as well. Those are all traditionalist practices. I mean, they represent the antithesis of everything else that we've talked about. It's associated with modernity in over the past 2 hours about wanting to artificially prolong life at all costs. Well, martyrdom completely defies that. It's actually can even embrace death, which I know sounds quite morbid, but it's the exact antithesis of that, right? So that's how they're all united in this particularity. Right? I know I went on a bit of a spiel, but that's also important because that ties into why I think Hezbollah is a more effective force than Hamas as well, right? And why, even though Al-Qaeda and ISIS, those types of groups said that they were against the West, they never actually really mustered any effective counter-reaction or resistance because of their universalist aspirations, which fundamentally aligns with global modernity. It was always, they were on the same side all along, essentially. And that's why we weaponized them against, for example, Syria. And even I'm not entirely sure because I don't have access to the records or anything, but we've seen a resurgence of ISIS-K. This is something that's extremely significant. So I think last year, the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, he actually said he predicted a resurgence of ISIS in the Middle Eastern political scene. He said, even though we thought that they'd been mostly wiped out from their base of operations in Iraq and Syria, which crippled them as a result, we're going to see resurgence because they're going to be essentially backed and instrumentalized by the West as tensions between these blocs rise. And it's going to be another instance of the weaponization process, right? And that's mostly...
Wait, you cut out.
Jordan, you cut out.
We still can't hear you.
Flying Cabal, I think you should take over since he's not talking, and this is just
Yeah. Okay,
20
can you just
seconds
cut
of
this out?
silence.
Can you just cut this part
I'm not
out?
going to cut this out. Just go on.
All right. Well, I definitely. I mean, I don't know what you thought of that. I mean, of everything that Jordan said, but I found it very.
I wasn't present for most of it, so I was hoping you could comment and catch me up.
Well, I'm just talking generally to the audience, but so he did what basically he did is discuss the concept of particularism, so to speak, or particularityism, however you want to define it, or particularity, and it's basically the antithesis to globalization, if you think about it, because it's the emphasis of particular local identity. So in the case of Iran, it would be the emphasis on just the Islamic religious tradition, particularly 12 or Shia Islam. But and
Wait, sorry, can you hear me or can you?
Yes, I can hear you now. But
Okay,
I've taken over.
You continued with my line of thought, right? Okay.
Okay, so I was talking about Iran being an Islamist republic, and as you were talking about in your lecture, so to speak, on particularity, it's the emphasis on what is local and what is dear to your culture, what is cherished in your particular society. And I found that particularly interesting is that
the key aspect is
the antithesis. The antithesis to globalism can be defined as particularity, because globalism is inherently something global, right? It encompasses the entire globe. Meanwhile, particularity encompasses particular cultures. And in this case, the Eurasianist bloc would form to conserve, under a common struggle to conserve your own, under a threat of Western liberal hegemony. And I know that we initially started talking about Neuralink and stuff like that, but this really ties into it directly, just because of how geopolitical movement, or just geopolitical / political advancement in all societies around the globe affect the social dynamics and technology and stuff like that. Because one key defining aspect of Western hegemony is technology, if you think about it, and particularly artificial reality, VR, Neuralink, etc. So, I mean, a reason as to why a lot of these powers unified under one banner. So, in particular, I'll just be going off more particularly off of the axis of resistance. Is because they felt a threat to their existence to a large extent. But in the case of the axis of resistance, it's obviously the encroachment of Israel onto their territories. I mean, I don't think that Greater Israel is really going to be something of a big geopolitical movement or anything, because, I mean, obviously they're already preoccupied with Hamas and just a bunch of other things. And, I mean, obviously the Arab world would just jump out, so to speak, to any advance, just the expulsion of all Arabs from Palestine in the occupation of Jordan or something like that. But anyways, that's another tangent. they unified under a common socio-political commonality, so to speak, to reject Western dominance in the region. And you could say it was a wholly geopolitical, just in lieu of Israel. But I mean, if you look into that issue on a deeper level, if you research stuff like the Houthis, the founder of the Houthi movement actually, or I believe was the guy that took over him, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, he actually wrote an article that is posted on their website about soft war and hard war. And what soft war is to quote him directly, is the occupation of the soul by foreign ideas. And in that article, they used the image of it was a U.S. tank, where I think a tank that said CIA, and it was just an icon of a TV. So at its muzzle.
Yeah. No, that's actually very interesting, because you mentioned the Mohageg book, where he's talking about the 1979 the revolution in Iran, and how it was spearheaded to a great extent by these intellectuals, like these Heidegger intellectuals, like Shariati, Fardid, Jalal Yamal. Yeah, they had the exact same ideas. Because that was coming out of the specific historical context where, the Shah, Reza Shah Pahlavi, had been installed essentially as a puppet of the West, and he imported these foreign cultures, these Western cultures. He initiated a process of modernization within Iran, which had devastating effects actually on the Iranian rural life, which is where the rurality and the rural segment of society, rural segments of the population, they're essentially the wellspring, I'd say, of traditional culture. It always originates from the rural areas. Right. So the devastation of the rural areas is one of the most significant attacks and assaults that you could launch against the traditional culture, right? And these intellectuals
are probably one of the more outrageous things that he did is he canceled the Islamic calendar and replaced it with the pre-Islamic Persian calendar.
It had links to Zoroastrianism.
Exactly.
He wants to project the image of a more civilized, secular Iran, and quote civilized, obviously. And so those intellectuals like Shariati and Ahmad, figures like that, they felt that had compromised also the sense of Iranian authenticity, which is why they were so attracted to an intellectual like Heidegger, because authenticity is obviously a key aspect of the Heideggerian philosophical project, right? And at the same time, they wrote extensively about technology and globalization. They said our revolution, this is not just a political revolution, but it's also a spiritual and metaphysical one, against the penetration of technology into our into our land, essentially, into this holy Iranian land. That's the same type of rhetoric that we see animating the 1979 Islamic Revolution. And it's funny that you said there's on the Houthi website that I guess that intellectual or ideologue, he's talking about the representation of America as just a TV, essentially just a symbol of mass media production. That's very telling, and that's the same sentiment absolutely animated the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. Jalal Ahmad, he wrote a book which is quite famous, and it's called Occidentosis, A Plague from the West, or it's also referred to as Westoxification. The term in Iranian, do you know how to pronounce that? I forgot what exactly it's called, but anyways, that's not quite as significant here as the fact that he thought that exposure to mass media, the foreign mass media and technology, was one of the most significant factors contributing to the decline, the degradation of traditional Iranian and Islamic life, because he conceived of Islamic and Iranian identity as inextricably intertwined with each other. Right, which is, again, that just affirms my thesis of particularity. So even though Islam, technically in the theological sense, may be universalist tradition, in this case, it's operating in a particularist manner. It's tied specifically to the local Iranian identity, right? This indigenous identity. And so he thought that the penetration of technology and mass media through at the time it wasn't quite as advanced as it is now, right? I mean, now technology is just morphed into this this beast, this global beast. But it was things like it was movie theaters. It was it was just foreign TV sets. It was the radio that transmitted a lot of Western influence into Iran and did absolutely contribute to the degradation of traditional culture. And so that's why technology and mass media came to be seen as, enemies of the covert war. It's soft power projection in a sense. Flying Cabal, you actually wrote an essay on this that you sent me not too long ago about the conflict in Yemen. It was about Yemeni history and the Houthis, and there was a bit of information about Iran in there. And you talked about, I believe you talked about the political scientist Joseph Nye, right?
Exactly.
He's also, I'm not sure exactly if he would be considered a realist in international relations theory, but as someone with a bit of a background in academic political science, I do find his distinction on hard power and soft power to be extremely relevant to today's world. And you can say, if we're going to look at Western foreign policy strategies, I think you could say that this weaponization strategy that I talked about would fall more so into the hard power category. But then the just covert influence of technology and mass media would probably fall into the soft power category.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We're seeing an even mix of both. But yeah, that's just an intersection with your essay. But it's the same type of essence that we see animating, the current Houthi movement, the Iran's current government, which has not faltered from the principles of the '79 Islamic Revolution. And that's exactly what not just Mohageg writes about in the book that I talked about, but also what I wrote about in this essay that's on my Substack that you can find, which is called Philosophical Insurgent. And that's going to be included in my book as well. And that's really at the heart of my book, my forthcoming book. So
wait, you're writing a book?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot, nice, man. Wait, what's the book going to be about?
Oh, I've been writing it for a while. I technically started it actually in late 2022. So I was 17 at the time. But it's about almost everything. It's going to encompass almost everything that we talked about today. So how I think the world politically is bifurcating to these two blocks. You could call them a Western, Eastern bloc, but I think a more precise term would just be, or a more precise way to phrase it would be Alexander Dugin's terminology, even Atlantis. So it's bifurcating into these two blocks, and we're seeing that this is manifesting not only in the form of overt military conflicts, the use of hard power, which I highlight specific wars I think represent fault lines in a sense, fractures along the fault line, like the Syrian civil war, the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, which are both ongoing conflicts. It's not only occurring on the hard lines, but it's also occurring on as basically as a philosophical and ideological clash of the most fundamental sort. That encompasses every other issue that we talked about, right? Globalization, technology, capitalism, etc., etc. So, anyway, it's really.
Do you think ISIS will return?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've already seen, because I was saying this before my mic disconnected. I ran into some tough technical difficulties, but yeah, Hassan Nasrallah. He's the leader of Hezbollah in 2023, even though he'd been saying it for a couple of years beforehand. He said ISIS is going to return to the scene, to the Middle Eastern. They're going to be used as a tool in this weaponization strategy. I mean, that's not exactly what he said. That's how I would paraphrase him. And he's been right, essentially. I mean, Turkey, not too long ago, busted a major ISIS ring that was plotting to kill hundreds of people.
Wait, when was that?
A couple of months ago, and they keep busting more and more members of the ring. I think not too long ago, I forgot the exact date, but Lebanese police and security forces busted an ISIS ring in Lebanon that was planning to bomb a hotel in Beirut, right, which is the capital in Lebanon. It's a major city. That attack probably would kill around 100 people as well. We saw, which is interesting. I mentioned this, but there was so ISIS-K is the strongest branch of ISIS that still remains. That's ISIS Khorasan province. Because after the central base of operations in Iraq and Syria, which constitute, the heartlands of ISIS in a sense, that's where most of their fighters were stationed. Most of their strongest military squadrons were based in those countries. That's where all their manpower and funding went to. After they were basically decimated in those countries, as a result of the initiatives of Soleimani, the Iranian general who was killed in 2020 by the U.S. drone strike. He led his IRGC forces on the ground in Iraq and Syria, and uprooted ISIS, defeated them in union with Hezbollah. just to combat the notion that these groups are all, Islamic terrorists that are all united, when that's absolutely not the case. So after those groups were decimated there, the base of operations, or not the base of operations, but the center of power essentially shifted to Central Asia, the ISIS Khorasan province. Because Khorasan is this historical region that refers to, I believe it's Iran, Afghanistan, and parts of Turkmenistan. But nowadays, it's been grafted onto and essentially superimposed onto present-day Central Asia, right? So we see most of the members of ISIS-K, the prominent members, are ethnic Tajiks, Uzbeks, Uyghurs, right? So for maybe some of them even, actually those three groups are all Turkic peoples. I suspect that they might even have some ties to these pan-Turkic terror organizations, right? Like, for example, the Turkish Grey Wolves, the Turkestan Islamic Party in Xinjiang, which is been embroiled in a conflict not just against the Chinese state, but also against Syria, which is allied with the Chinese state. So those are the main elements of ISIS-K, and it's just outside of maybe some African branches, like the West African province, I'd say it's the single strongest branch of ISIS that's around today. They launched the recent attack in Moscow. What was the name of the theater? I forgot the name of the theater. Crocus or something like that. Crocus. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But anyways, that was a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I think Crocus.
Yeah, Crocus. They killed about 100 people at a theater in Moscow, which is a devastating attack. And then a couple of months ago, on January 4th, I believe, maybe 3rd, so it was the 4-year anniversary of Soleimani's death. They targeted a procession that was commemorating his death. And that attack, it was in a city called Kerman in Iran, and that attack killed about 40 people. That really reflects the alignment and the orientation of ISIS in this broader geopolitical rift. I mean, they're showing their true colors in a sense. So yeah.
And what do you think is going to happen, like with America, possibly in the next 10 years? You know how there was like 9/11, things like that.
Yeah. Well, I don't think really that the threat. Okay. I think here's the thing, right? So there's this distinction that we've seen in just jihadist ideology develop over the past couple of decades, right? And it actually goes back to this guy Said Qutb, who was an Egyptian Islamist who essentially founded the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. I believe with this other man named Hassan al-Banna. And
that was before, though. That was several decades.
Yeah, no, Hassan al-Banna was before. Yeah. But the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, I think he played a key role in perpetuating. And so he's been a major influence on just contemporary jihadist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And if you look at his ideology and what he writes about in his books, he said, okay, well, you have to divide the enemy into the far enemy and the near enemy. And so he actually suggested to his followers that temporarily the near enemy should take precedence, right? And so for him, the near enemy were constituted secular governments in the Middle East that were ruling over Muslim populations that he felt were being oppressed inherently as a result of living under secular rule. So he told his followers, well, you should attack the near enemy first, right? You should overthrow these secular dogs, you call them, these secular puppets. You should overthrow them first. Then maybe you can pursue a global jihad. But that would have to be a prerequisite, right? That was his tactical recommendation. And if the viewers are interested, there's a good book on this by his political scientist named Fawaz Girjas. He's one of the foremost experts on jihadism. It's called The Far Enemy, Why Jihad and Global. I think it was published in 2009, but it's still quite relevant. And so I think that's likely the strategy that ISIS-K is employing right now, right? Because if you see who they've attacked in the past couple of years, it's mainly been in countries like Afghanistan, now Iran, which is in
Syria.
Well, that was a bit of a different branch. I think you could say of ISIS. That was more the central branch, right? But Iran, which isn't really too far from Central Asia, which is their base of operations. Now Russia, which countries that are a bit geographically closer, right, to their base of operations. I'm not with that being said, I think there's that strategic consideration where they're more likely, obviously, to attack countries that are geographically closer to them because it's a lot more practical. And then two, despite the fact that they have strengthened, I don't think that they're really strong enough to actually, or that they even have the capabilities to attack the U.S. Unless there's, for example, a lone wolf sympathizer in the U.S. that just agrees with their ideology and that pledges allegiance to them and then decides to attack the U.S. Because that was
Yeah,
always
that has actually happened before.
yeah, that was always the jihadist model. They followed they heavily utilized these embittered, alienated lone wolves within Western countries to attack. Right, that was what we saw in 2016 in Orlando, and 2000 it was either 14 or 15.
Yeah, and I think there was
So
I forgot from what country it was from, but it was basically this. Yeah, but I mean, he was allied to ISIS, or at least he pledged allegiance to them.
Yeah,
what he did, he basically went to a gay nightclub and shot up the place.
Yeah, that was in 2016. Yeah, that's the Orlando attack I'm talking about. Yeah, he was one of the lone wolf attackers. But again, this is ISIS-K that we're talking about. That's not really their struggle. Their struggle is, I think, if anything, it's just going to be they're serving as a tool of the Atlanticist powers. I mean, it's very obvious, right? I don't think that they're going to be interested in attacking the United States or any other Western countries anytime soon. And I think that's good. They actually attacked Russia, China, not China directly, but they're probably allied with groups in China that have attacked China, right? But Russia, Iran, Afghanistan, so those members of this Eurasian bloc that they're going after, right? I don't think that they're going to attack America. To answer your question, just in a succinct way,
dude. And Jordan, bro, you have like so much insight on these topics, dude. Like you're like a whole like knowledge unit, bro. Like we gotta get you a government position, bro.
I actually do. When I by the way, just Jacob, if you're still there, we should really wrap the podcast up.
Yeah, I was literally about to say Jordan will get a government position at some point. I believe it.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, but I agree with wrapping the whole podcast up.
Yeah, we should really wrap up the podcast because it's becoming extremely disorganized. But yeah, I hope I didn't talk for too long because I went on a bit of a rant.
No, you're fine.
It's all good, bro.
It's all important though. I never say anything that's just superfluous or like unnecessary or random. I just try and be really intentional about everything.
Yeah, you're like, there was this book in 1963, and then they said this, and there was this thing. Like, dude, it's crazy. Like, you know a lot of stuff, man.
Thank you, bro. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, that's how it answers your question. That's the direction I think things are going to go in. But yeah, we should wrap this up because we touched on an extremely broad array of topics.
Well, thank you for actually elaborating on these topics and giving us some context.
Yeah, we should know because we haven't really talked about global politics or geopolitics that much, even though it's very intertwined. I think what our actual project is, like the project of Scorpion Movement. We touched on it briefly in the first podcast, but I do think that we should try and do that more so in the next couple of episodes. So that's just what I'll say to wrap it up. But yeah, go ahead.
The aim of the Scorpion Movement is to take these ideas that people debate and sit around and circle jerk on and put them into action. That's what the aim of Scorpion Movement is. That's the aim of Scorpion Movement in a sentence.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Scorpion Podcast. If you want to see any more, please feel free to look on the channel.
It's a W podcast. This podcast was lit. Freaking W podcast. Let's go. You know what I'm saying? This podcast was lit. Iran did the bombing while we were talking. It's like freaking crazy, bro. But this was a W podcast. It was lit.
Exactly.
W pod. Let's freaking go.
Okay.
W pod.
Dude, I'm gonna